Chapter 2309. I am a chaotic being. What do you mean by male or female? It angrily complained in Ning Xuema's mind. Ning Xuema looked at Shinjiuli, who was standing beside her. She saw that he was just looking at them with his arms crossed. She quickly pulled up her son, who was almost glued to her lap. She pointed at Shinjiuli and said, "Nianma, haven't you always been thinking about your father? Look, he is back. Have you met him? Quickly, greet your father." Otherwise, Shinjiuli would not know that Nianma was hiding in the stomach of the stone. Nianma finally raised his head and looked at Shinjiuli, who was only a few years older than him. He hesitated and finally called out, "Father." "Father." He blinked his eyes and felt a little strange. He actually saw his father wearing a dudu. He did not know which family had such a privilege. In fact, he wanted to jump into his father's arms, but looking at his father, who was like a little brother, he was too embarrassed to do so. Shinjiuli glanced at his son. His son's little thoughts could not be hidden from his eyes. He waved at him and said, "Nianma, come here." After all, it was the nature of father and son. Nianma hesitated for a moment, but he still ran over and looked up at his father. "Father! Father!" Shinjiuli carried him in his arms and stroked his hair gently. "Don't you recognize your father, Nianma?" Nianma smelled the familiar scent on his body and finally found some feeling. He suddenly raised his little hand and raised it to hug his father's neck. "I recognize you. Father, when you are free, can you turn into a doll wearing a dudu and play with me again?" Shinjiuli was speechless. Ning Xuema was speechless. She could not help but laugh. Did her son see his father wearing a dudu? If that was the case, her son's image of the great god would be ruined. Just when she thought of this, she saw a faint white light coming out from Shinjiuli's palm. She instantly understood what Shinjiuli wanted to do. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything to stop him. If her son saw her wearing open-crotch pants, she would have the urge to erase his memory. A moment later, Nianma fell asleep on Shinjiuli's shoulder. First of all, his nerves had been tense all day, and now that he was relaxed, he was indeed sleepy. Secondly, after a part of one's memory was erased, one would feel a little sleepy. He patted his son's back and looked up to see Ning Xuema looking at him with a faint smile. "Guru, you're starting to erase my son's memory again. You've erased mine before. But I've recovered later. Do you want to erase mine too?" Back then, when she saw him wearing a dudu, she mistook him for a ginseng baby. Shinjiuli held her hand and pulled her towards the heavenly Tao stone. "When you saw me, it proved that we were fated to be together. Since you are my wife, it doesn't matter if you saw me." But his son couldn't. "Don't worry, I'm only erasing a small part of his memory. It won't affect him at all." He was his own son, so he naturally did not want him to be hurt. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly moved. The great god knew about erasing her memory. Did it mean that he was the great god who had experienced 3 lifetimes with her? Her eyes immediately became lively. She held Shinjiuli's hand tightly. It was as if she was holding the whole world in her hands. Then, she looked at little Nianma in his arms and breathed a sigh of relief. This was her husband and her son. Now, the family of 3 was reunited. She had finally completed her journey. Chapter 2310. The most romantic thing I can think of is to raise the child with you, to be with you until the end of time, she sang softly. Her heart was filled with happiness that was about to overflow. The heavenly Tao stone wanted to sneak away when the family was reunited. However, it was shocked when it saw Shinjiuli dragging his wife and child toward it. "What are you doing?" Shinjiuli answered concisely, "Send us back to Imo Palace." The heavenly Tao stone was unyielding. I'm the heavenly Tao stone, not a carriage. Was he really using it as a transportation tool? Shinjioli took out 7 or 8 red crystals and tossed them to the stone. You don't want these anymore. The blood crystals were full of energy. The heavenly Tao stone was almost startled. However, it was the heavenly Tao stone, the only high-class stone in the world. Giving in for a few pieces of jade seemed to be degrading its style. Shinjioli glanced at it. With a flick of his finger, another 4 blood-red beads flew out from his fingertips. Do you recognize this item? The heavenly Tao stone was shocked. The inner core of a top-grade demon. This was something that could only be found by chance. It immediately flooded Shinjioli's mind. The extreme demonic pill. By the way, supreme divinity, although this thing can quickly improve one's skills, its demonic nature is very strong. You can't use it, or else you'll easily go mad and affect your divine body. You're quite knowledgeable. I don't need it, but I can give it to Shuama, Shinjioli answered casually. She can't use it either. Her Buddhist nature is stronger than her demonic nature. If she consumes this pearl, it will greatly damage her Buddhist nature. The heavenly Tao stone advised earnestly. Shinjioli glanced at it and kept the inner cores. Then let's keep it first and give it to the fated one in the future. The heavenly Tao stone immediately said sincerely, I am the fated one. I can dissolve the evil aura above and only absorb the energy above. If it absorbed these inner cores and the blood crystal jade, it would definitely be able to recover to its original level within a day. What about sending us back to Mo Palace? The heavenly Tao stone didn't care about its principles anymore. Okay, I'll give it to you. I'll do it. Ning Xuema looked at the hall filled with crystals and Shinjioli, who was sitting on the crystal lotus. She didn't expect that there would be another world inside the heavenly Tao stone. Needless to say, the Almighty was reborn here. Shinjioli gave the heavenly Tao stone an extreme demonic pill and a blood crystal jade. After the heavenly Tao stone was digested, the entire stone was as excited as if it had been injected with chicken blood. Like a whirlwind, it brought the family of 3 straight to Mo Palace. Ning Xuema was sitting in the pavilion in the garden, drinking tea leisurely. Because the resentment between heaven and earth had been removed, the weather had returned to normal. From time to time, a few wisps of white clouds would float across the sky. The sky was high, the clouds were light, and the flowers and trees were flourishing. Everything could not be better. Ning Xuema casually caught the petals that fluttered over and sighed. She hadn't seen Shinjioli for 3 days. After the family of 3 returned to Mo Palace that day, Shinjioli didn't appear in front of everyone. Instead, he sent Ning Xuema and their son out of the heavenly Tao stone and asked them to return to the ground. He didn't come out with them. Ning Xuema knew that he was in a hurry to cultivate and recover his power, so she didn't force him. She brought their son out in front of everyone first. Her safe return naturally caused a stir. The entire Mo Palace was filled with joy. Chapter 23:11. Ning Xuema's story in the underworld had spread all over the 6 realms. Her reputation could not be any more well known. Many people came to visit and congratulate her. Mo Palace was bustling with noise and excitement. The news of the Divine Lord's resurrection had also spread all over the world. Those who came to congratulate her naturally asked about the whereabouts of the Divine Lord. General Manager Heimu received Ning Xuema's order and rejected all the questions with the excuse that the Divine Lord had returned to Fantian Palace. Everyone knew that the Divine Lord had always been indifferent and low-key. He did not like to socialize. It was reasonable for him to return to Fantian Palace to recuperate after his resurrection, so no one asked any more. The hustle and bustle lasted for 2 days before it finally quieted down. Ning Xuema finally had some free time to stroll around the garden and drink tea. At this moment, she was a little lost in her thoughts as she looked at the petals. Was the great deity really back? Everything was not a dream, was it? She rubbed her eyebrows and felt that she was beginning to worry about her gains and losses again. She looked at the lawn not far away. When she and little Nienma were sent out by the Heavenly Law Stone, they emerged from there. The Heavenly Law Stone should still be in that position, right? She had used the ground drilling spell to search the place more than 10 times, but she still could not find the shadow of the stone. The more she could not find it, the more uncertain she felt. There was always a sense of emptiness in her heart. Part of little Nienma's memory had been wiped away by Shinjuli. He could not remember anything about his father in the Heavenly Law Stone. This made Ning Xuema feel that she was still dreaming. The air was filled with the fragrance of the plants. Ning Xuema slowly walked down and circled around the lawn. She was wondering if she should go down to look for it again. She did not want to disturb Shinjuli. She just wanted to make sure that she could find the stone. Mother! Little Nienma rushed to her and threw himself into her arms. Ning Xuema picked up her son and pinched his arms and legs. She was pleased to find that the little guy had grown a little chubbier. Now, it looked white and tender, like a pink glutinous rice ball. Strangely enough, little Nienma was very clingy on the first day when she came back. He followed her around like a little tail. He would look for her whenever she was not around. Even when Ning Xuema met with the leaders of the 6 realms, he followed her everywhere as if he had been abandoned. But the next day, it was as if he had suddenly grown up. He told her that he wanted to concentrate on his cultivation. He wanted to practice his martial arts to be very powerful so that he could protect his mother. Ning Xuema was naturally gratified by her son's ambition, so she stopped caring about him. He only wanted Bai Zhe to follow him. She hadn't seen her son for 2 days. Now that she saw him running over, she was naturally happy. She picked her son up and kissed him on the cheek. At the same time, she asked her son about his homework and what he had learned in the past 2 days. Little Nienma pondered for a moment and took out 2 drawings from his pocket. He handed them to Ning Xuema and asked, "Mother, what do you think of my drawing skills?" Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. She hadn't forgotten the small figure drawn by her son, so she just casually glanced at it. Her eyes widened at what she saw. There were 2 sets of wedding clothes in the drawing. Although the style of the drawing was still immature, the characteristics of the wedding clothes could be clearly drawn. It was very much like a modern design of clothing drawings. She hadn't seen her son for a few days, but his drawing skills had improved by leaps and bounds. It seemed that he had inherited it from his father. Ning Xuema was very pleased to see it. She gave her son a thumbs up and praised him generously. Chapter 23:12. Little Nienma smiled and shook her arm. He asked her which of the 2 sets of wedding dresses was the most beautiful, and the one she liked the most. Ning Xuema looked at it carefully and pointed at one of the sets. "Mother likes this one." She liked the style and the cloud pattern of the wedding dress. She had never seen this wedding dress before, but it was the style she liked. However, she was still a little puzzled. Her son was so young. Why did he want to draw such a wedding dress? Did he want to get married? Isn't this a little too precocious? Also, the design of the wedding dress was very beautiful. It did not seem like it was designed by little Nienma himself. She asked her son in a joking tone, "Nienma, did you think of the wedding dress by yourself?" Little Nienma paused and immediately shook his head. "No, Bai Zhe gave me a picture book. I thought it looked good, so I copied 2 sets. So that was it." The little guy's taste was good. It actually overlapped with hers. Actually, she liked the 2 sets of wedding clothes on the top. "Mother, I have to go and practice." Goodbye, mother. Little Nianma kissed her face and then jumped down from the ground and ran away. Ning Xuema was speechless. The little guy was running a little too fast. She had not had enough affection with her son. Her son did not seem to be clingy with her at all. Sigh, she seemed to be a little disappointed. It was said that boys would not be clingy with adults until they were 12 or 13 years old. Was it too early for Nianmo? The boy was only 6 months old. He even drew the wedding dress and came to ask her if it looked good. Did he really have a crush on a little girl? Thinking up to this point, Ning Xuema felt that it was a bit funny, so she tossed this question aside. She circled around the grassland, but in the end, she didn't give up. She once again burrowed into the ground and carefully searched for a long time, but she still couldn't find the white stone's shadow. At night, when Ning Xuema was about to go to bed, little Nianma appeared at her door with a pillow and looked at her eagerly. Mother, can I sleep with you tonight? Ning Xuema naturally won't object. She nodded, okay. She hasn't slept with her son in her arms for a long time. She misses it. Little Nianma cheered and immediately climbed onto her bed. He lay down obediently on the bed. Ning Xuema also got on the bed and held her son in her arms. The little guy was chubby and warm, and it felt very comfortable to hold him in her arms. Mother, can Nianma sleep with you often in the future? Sure. Ning Xuema answered casually. She was quite willing to sleep with her son in her arms. It was like hugging a warm pillow. Yay! The little fellow cheered and snuggled deeper into her embrace. He was still a child and liked to sleep in his mother's arms. That way, he would feel more secure. However, someone said that he was not allowed to sleep with his mother in the future. Now that he had gotten his mother's approval, he immediately smiled. As long as his mother agreed, other people's opinions could be ignored. Little Nianma was very satisfied with the answer that he wanted. Then, he thought of something else. Mother, tomorrow is your birthday. What do you want as a gift? Her son was so filial. He actually thought of her birthday gift. If her son did not mention it, she would have almost forgotten about it. In fact, what she wanted was very simple. She wanted Shinjioli to come back so that the family of 3 could reunite and never be separated again. Chapter 23:13. Tomorrow was her birthday, but there was no news from Shinjioli. She was afraid that he could not remember her birthday. After all, they had been apart for a long time, and they had been through so many life and death situations. How could he remember her birthday? If it was not a dream, he should still be practicing. He would only appear when he fully recovered. She did not know when he would recover. She was a little distracted. Shin Nianma waited for a while, but she did not answer. He could not help but ask her again. Ning Xuema lowered her head to look at her son's big eyes. She lowered her head and kissed his forehead. No matter what gift Nianma prepares for you, you will like it. Shin Nianma was full of confidence. I will give you an unforgettable birthday present. Both of them were chatting while lying on the bed. Little Nianma was still a child after all. He could not bear it any longer. When he was about to fall asleep, he was still worried about Ning Xuema. Mother, you have to hug Nianma more often in the future. Don't fool a child. Ning Xuema remembered that she and her son had been apart for a long time. The little guy had gone through so many hardships at such a young age. She felt guilty and promised, okay, I won't fool you. Nianma can sleep with mother whenever he wants to. With this promise, Shin Nianma was finally able to sleep without any worries. Ning Xuema had a habit of waking up early every day. She would wake up at 6:00 every day. Shin Nianma was still a child, so he was not willing to wake up early. It was not easy to wake him up. Today, Ning Xuemo opened her eyes on time, but she found that her son, who had been sleeping next to her, was gone. She was shocked and quickly contacted her son with a directed audio spell. The little guy's voice was heard. "Mother, I want to prepare a birthday present for you. See you later." Ning Xuemo couldn't help but laugh. The little guy was really cute. In order to prepare a birthday present for her, he unexpectedly woke up early for the first time. She washed up a little. She did not care much about her birthday. She opened the door and was about to go to the study room to deal with the backlog of work. However, she saw General Manager Heimu standing outside the door. Behind him was a string of maids from Mo Palace. Today, head steward Heimu was wearing a new robe. His face was glowing, and there was a smile on his face. He looked as spirited as a bridegroom. The maids behind him were also dressed in new clothes, and they were even holding trays in their hands. Ning Xuemo raised an eyebrow. Steward Heimu usually only came here when he had something urgent to report. What was going on today? And he even brought so many people with him. Before she could ask, head steward Heimu took a step forward and said, "Congratulations, Devil Master." "Congratulations." The maids behind him followed suit and bowed. "Congratulations, Devil Lord." "Congratulations." Ning Xuemo, was Chief Steward Heimu putting on a show? This line was a good play. She almost followed the script and asked him, where did the joy come from? Fortunately, she stopped herself and only looked at him. "Heimu, are you all right?" She felt that he was a little strange today. Head steward Heimu smiled. "Devil Master, listen. What's that noise outside?" Ning Xuemo, she listened carefully and faintly heard the sound of music from the front. The music sounded very festive, as if there was a happy occasion. She suddenly realized that Steward Heimu was going to celebrate her birthday, right? Chapter 23:14. She looked at the 2 rows of people behind Heimu and shook her head. "You're making it too grand." She wasn't an old lady in her 70s or 80s, today is such a joyous day. It's not too much to make it as grand as possible. Head steward Heimu bowed again, then waved at the 2 rows of maids behind him. "Help the Devil Master get dressed." Ning Xuemo was speechless. Alright, it was rare for them to make it so grand. She couldn't reject their enthusiasm. So be it. She was going to be the birthday girl for once. "Devil Master, may this subordinate be so bold as to ask you something?" Head steward Heimu bowed again. "What is it?" "Devil Master, when the maids dress you up later, can you close your eyes and not look at them? This subordinate wants you to open your eyes again. This subordinate wants to give you a big surprise." Head steward Heimu was getting more and more mysterious today. Ning Xuemo was very confident in head steward Heimu. Since he wanted to give her a surprise, she would wait for it. She had been a little bored these past 2 days, so it was fun to look forward to it. She would just treat it as sharing the joy with the people. Ning Xuemo was a woman of her word. When the maids helped her get dressed, she didn't peek at them at all. She only felt that the clothes she was wearing today were especially complicated, and her hair was combed especially tightly. She even seemed to be wearing a veil. Ning Xuemo knew how to dress up. She didn't even need to open her eyes. Just by looking at their actions on her face, she could tell what kind of makeup they put on her face. It wasn't a prank. If she wasn't mistaken, it should be extremely exquisite. Outside, the sound of a string instrument was melodious, cheerful and pleasant to the ear. Ning Xuemo sat there and listened, feeling very comfortable. It seemed that head steward Heimu had put in a lot of effort today. The song he chose was also one she liked, so she liked it very much. After the maids finished helping her get dressed, they helped her up. She didn't know what material the clothes were made of. Although it was complicated, it was strangely smooth on her body. It didn't feel cumbersome at all. The music outside suddenly stopped, and another piece of heavenly music descended from the sky. It sounded as if countless heavenly flowers were falling from the sky. The music was also joyous and festive. It was composed of guqin, pipa, flute, shao, kongho, suona, and so on. The music played by so many musical instruments was unusually harmonious and pleasing to the ears. This piece of music was well arranged. Every single instrument was played to its best standard. Ning Xuema gave the composer a thumbs up in her heart. The maids clustered around her as they walked out of the hall. The music outside was even louder and clearer. In the midst of the music, her hand was suddenly held by someone. She subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand, but it was held tightly by that hand. That hand was warm and familiar. Ning Xuema's heart was beating wildly. Before she opened her eyes, she could smell a faintly discernible cold fragrance. This is, at this moment, head steward He Mu's voice sounded at the right time. Devil Master, please open your eyes. Ning Xuema opened her eyes. Her gaze collided with a pair of deep blue eyes. That pair of eyes was slightly curved, and they were filled with a warm smile. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Shinjiuli. He finally came. He finally appeared in front of her again. At this moment, he was holding her hand, and their fingers were intertwined. Did he come to celebrate her birthday? Ning Xuema's gaze shifted from his face to their intertwined hands, and then back to his body. Then, her small mouth opened slightly. You. Chapter 23:15. Shinjuli's outfit today was very different from the usual. His white robe was now red like fire. She knew better than anyone else that Shinjuli was obsessed with the color of his clothes. Shinjuli did not like red. At least, he did not like to wear red. She had known him for so long, but she had never seen him wear red. The most he would wear was a red plum embroidered on his white robe. Today, he was wearing a red robe. Judging from the style, it was the splendid red robe worn by the bridegrooms. Of course, the red robe he wore was much better than the other bridegrooms in terms of style and quality. It looked simple, but the tailoring was very fitting. It made his body look taller and taller. Ning Xuema had always thought that Shinjuli was not suited to wear red. She did not expect him to look so elegant in it. His face was undoubtedly very handsome. When he looked at her with a smile, he was like a shining body that attracted everyone's attention. Especially the women around him, they could not help but gasp. They could not take their eyes off him. When Ning Xuema saw him appear in front of her wearing a red robe, her heart skipped a beat. In a split second, she knew what was going on. She subconsciously looked at herself. Indeed, she was wearing a red wedding dress. The wedding dress looked like, Ning Xuema's heart suddenly skipped a beat. The wedding dress looked like the one that little Nianma asked her to choose for herself. She was wearing a wedding dress. Was she finally going to marry him? Although they even had a child, they did not officially hold any ceremony. He also did not give her any official status. And after so many life and death separations, she had completely forgotten about this. She thought that as long as the three of them were reunited, it would be the greatest happiness. She did not expect that he would give her such a big surprise. On her birthday, he came to marry her. Xuema, will you marry me? Shinjuli's voice was heard. It was as magnetic and cold as the spring in the forest. His deep eyes looked at her as if he wanted to suck her soul in. How could she not be willing? She did not know how long she had been looking forward to this day. Was this considered a marriage proposal? Although this proposal was made during the wedding ceremony, it wasn't too late. Ning Xuema's nose suddenly felt a little sour, but she tilted her head and looked at him with a faint smile. You didn't tell me in advance about such a big thing. Did you want to give me a surprise? Shinjioli smiled and held her even tighter. Yes. Do you like it? I like it. She loved it so much. She was about to go crazy with love. The bubbles of joy in his heart were already bubbling. Ning Xuema finally understood what it meant to have a heart full of blooming flowers. This was it. She really felt the flowers in her heart blossoming one by one, each blossoming with joy. She didn't say anything for a while. Shinjioli thought she was blaming him for arranging the wedding without discussing it with her. He said in a low voice, Xuema, it's my fault for not discussing it with you in advance. I like it. Ning Xuema suddenly opened her mouth and interrupted him. Her eyes were bright, and her voice was clear and loud. Everyone present could hear her. I do. Thunderous applause rang out from all around. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief and cheers rang out. Ning Xuema looked around and realized that the outside of her bedroom was already decorated with lanterns and streamers. It was splendid, with red silk ribbons fluttering in the wind. Chapter 23:16. Obviously, these were all arranged in the middle of the night to give her a surprise. Every arrangement was ingenious. It seemed that everyone in the Mo Palace knew about this wedding, except for her, the most important person involved. They must have put in a lot of effort to create this surprise for her, right? Manager Himu, who was standing not far away, also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. This idea was proposed by Shinjioli. He was the one who arranged everything in the Mo Palace secretly. He was afraid that the Devil Master would blame him at this moment, but now he was finally relieved. The Devil Master was a generous and straightforward woman. If she liked something, she would like it. She would not be bashful. Shinjioli also smiled as if a burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He lifted her up and said, Xuema, come home with me. He walked towards the gorgeous wedding car not far away. Ning Xuema felt that everything that happened next was like a beautiful dream. The wedding car sent by Shinjioli was a wedding car woven with fresh flowers. There were clusters of red flowers that looked like peonies blooming on the car. The flowers were sparkling and translucent like dewdrops. There were sharp pearl tassels hanging around the wedding car. When they swayed slightly, they flashed with a dreamy luster. The interior of the car was also covered with flower petals. Ning Xuema sat in the car and felt like she was sitting in a sea of flowers. She was sitting on soft petals, which was more comfortable than clouds. Shinjioli sat behind her. She leaned in his arms and looked at the floating white clouds outside the car. The car was pulled by a red phoenix. It flew quickly and steadily in the air. There were various musicians playing in front of the wedding car. Every tune was beautiful and moving. Among the musicians, there was one person who attracted the most attention. That person was dressed in green. He was tall and straight. Looking at his back, one would think that he was very handsome. Ning Xuema's gaze fell on that person's back. She felt that that person was very familiar. That person seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly turned around and nodded at her, who had just stuck her head out of the car window. Ning Xuema's eyes widened. That person was Yi Tianli. So he really was still alive, he really wasn't dead. The videos Luo Jiuqin showed her that day were all lies. She did not kill her friend by mistake. Ning Xuema heaved a long sigh of relief, and the last bit of gloominess in her heart disappeared. But this fellow was really something else. He said he'd come down to the mortal world to help her find medicine, but he never turned back. No one had seen him since, causing her to think that he'd really fallen into Luo Jiuqin's hands. But now it seemed that wasn't the case. Shinjioli hugged her from behind and seemed to sense her emotions. He smiled and tightened his arms around her waist. He was indeed captured by Luo Jiuchen that day and was indeed trapped on the totem pole. However, he was trapped in the Western Array core. I had already rescued him before I broke the array. It turned out that Luo Jiuchen was not completely lying. There was indeed a sacrifice trapped on the totem pole, but he also sensed that Yi Tianli had escaped at the first moment, so he mistakenly thought that it was Yi Tianli who had broken the West Formation Eye. He was resentful that he did not kill him in time. Ning Xuema suddenly seemed to think of something. Then, who was trapped on the totem pole in the Northern Array core? In other words, who did she accidentally kill? Shinjioli said lazily in her ear, "Not every totem pole can trap people." Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. Did that mean that there was no one on the North Totem Pole? She breathed a sigh of relief and patted her chest. That's good. Shinjioli's eyes flashed slightly. He smiled and said nothing. Indeed, not every totem pole could trap people. For example, the totem pole in the south was empty, but the one in the north that Ning Xuema had broken originally trapped people. Chapter 23:17. The one who was trapped was the former Heavenly Emperor, Yun Lang. However, Shinjioli did not intend to let Ning Xuema know the truth, lest she felt guilty again. He did not want her to have any psychological burden. At this moment, he was very close to her, and there was almost no gap between them. His warm breath blew directly into her ear, making her ear itchy and warm. The atmosphere in the car was faintly ambiguous. Shinjioli hugged her in his arms and smelled the faint fragrance on her body. His heartbeat gradually quickened, but he restrained himself and did not let himself take the next step. Everything would be left in that moment. She would completely become his, from her body to her heart. They would have a lot of time to spend with each other, to make love. However, it was a little difficult to restrain himself at this moment. Shinjioli's body was slightly stiff. Of course, Ning Xuema did not know that he was in a dilemma at this moment. Her body leaned against his broad chest as if she was leaning against the whole world, and her heart was bubbling with warmth. She had never thought that a person could be so happy to this extent. This kind of happiness seemed to overflow from her chest, and it made her eyebrows curl and the corners of her lips curl up. She felt that it was not enough, and she wanted to be more intimate with him. She turned around and hugged his waist, leaning her head on his chest to listen to his steady and powerful heartbeat. Then, she realized that his heartbeat seemed to be a little fast, and it seemed to be getting faster and faster. Almighty, your heartbeat is so fast. Dong, 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 it vibrated her eardrums, making her heartbeat faster for no reason. Shinjioli. He was trying hard to restrain himself, but this girl still teased him. He did not say anything, but he did not hug her back. Ning Xuema looked up and met his deep eyes, and her heart skipped a beat. He clearly didn't do anything, but Ning Xuema had an inexplicable feeling of being swallowed by him. She coughed and looked down, past his tall nose, and landed on his beautiful light red lips. His lips were light, but there was a kind of captivating charm, which made Ning Xuema want to kiss him again. At this time, she would naturally do whatever she wanted to do, so she kissed him directly. Shinjioli's body stiffened slightly, and his fingers clenched by his side. Ning Xuema licked his lips, and his lips were slightly pursed, and he did not respond to her. Ning Xuema did not give up, and used the tip of her tongue to trace his lips, but she still did not get a response. He lost interest in her so quickly. They had met after such a long separation, he did not even give her a proper kiss. Ning Xuema felt a little wronged, pursed her lips, and wanted to take a step back. Her waist was suddenly hugged tightly by him. Then, the world spun around her. When she opened her eyes, she was already pinned down by his body. His breath was scorching hot, and his voice was slightly hoarse. Xuema, do you want me to take you here? Their bodies were pressed together without any gap, and she could clearly feel the change in his body. A certain part of him was as hard as iron. Her face suddenly turned red. Although the inside of the car was magnificent, there was a wedding procession outside the car, and there were people all around. Although she had always been open-minded, she did not want to do it in this place. Moreover, she was wearing a bridal gown. Although the gown was very beautiful, it had a very bad problem. It was not easy to put it on or take it off, and it could only be used once. Once it was taken off, it would not be able to return to its original state. Chapter 23:18. She did not want to be disheveled when she got out of the car. She coughed and pushed him away. No, I don't want to. Well, get up. Let's talk. Shinjuli took a deep breath and lay down beside her. He calmed his breath and asked her lazily, "What do you want to talk to me about?" There were too many things that she wanted to talk to him about. She thought of the most important one. Where is Nyenmo? Shinjuli traced her mouth with his finger. Can you guess where he is? Ning Xuema had a sudden idea. Is he in the Fantian Palace? Smart. Shinjuli praised her. Ning Xuema turned over and held his restless hand. Little Nyenma should know about the wedding today, right? Have you discussed it with him? When did you crawl out of the heavenly law stone? The first thing you did after crawling out was not to see me. She asked a series of questions. Shinjuli laughed. How can I surprise you if I see you in advance? As for the recovery, I only fully recovered in the early hours of this morning. In other words, he only came out of the heavenly law stone today. Ning Xuema was bewildered. But from what I see, this formation of yours doesn't seem to be something you came up with on the spot. The wedding seemed simple, but it was complicated. Moreover, he had made it so grand that it had never been before. Shinjuli played the flute between his fingers. Haven't you heard of the word strategizing? Even if he was in the heavenly law stone, he could still command people to do those complicated things. Well, what you said makes sense. However, the 2 wedding pictures that Nyenma made were drawn by you, right? Did you ask him to copy them? So, you have met him before yesterday. Since you did not come out in advance, how did you meet him? Shinjuli raised his hand and touched her head. Then, he told her a more exciting news. Nyenma can go in and out of the heavenly law stone at will these 2 days. Some of my orders were sent out by him. It turned out that the little guy had actually done so many things behind the scenes. She looked at him. The 8 great divine beasts also knew about it in advance, right? Over the past 3 days, she hadn't seen the shadows of the 8 divine beasts at all. At that time, head steward Himu had said that the 8 divine beasts, aside from Baizé, were all in closed-door cultivation. She had believed it to be true, but this time, there were 8 mythological beasts in the wedding procession brought by Shinjuli. The one pulling the carriage was the fire phoenix, while the ones clearing the way were the soaring serpent and Cheongqi. Baizé was holding the line, and there were a few other divine beasts on both sides and at the back. Not one of the 8 divine beasts was missing. All of them were in high spirits, beaming with joy. The 8 mythological beasts became the main force and auspicious beasts of the wedding procession. Who in the 6 realms would be so generous? Moreover, judging from their formation, it was obvious that they were well trained and had rehearsed in advance. Ning Xuema's question hit the nail on the head. Shinjuli smiled and said nothing. It turned out that the whole world knew about it, and she was the only one who was kept in the dark. She was such a smart person, but she was actually kept in the dark. They had made such a big scene, but they did not give themselves away in advance. Needless to say, Shinjuli was secretly directing all of this. The Almighty was indeed a black-bellied master. Ning Xuemo looked at his eyebrows and asked, Almighty, how many lives of memory do you have? Do you have 3 lives? Shinjioli looked at her quietly. After a moment, he smiled and said, 4 lives. Chapter 23:19. Ah! Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat. 4 lifetimes. Which 4 lifetimes? She had only experienced 3 lifetimes with him. Where did the 4th life come from? Shinjioli lay down again and answered her lazily, think about it yourself. When Ning Xuemo was about to think about it, there was a sudden explosion of fireworks outside. Shinjioli sat up with her in his arms and snuggled with her in front of the window. Come, look at the birthday present I have prepared for you. Flames rose into the sky one after another, exploding in the deep blue sky. Then, they scattered into tens of thousands of flowers that drifted with the wind. Those flowers were as red as the red spider lily, but the outer circle was inlaid with silver edges. Each flower was dazzling and beautiful, falling like rain. The scenery was so dreamy that it almost made people feel like they were in a dream. Ning Xuemo opened her eyes wide and murmured, Am I still dreaming? Shinjioli's fingers were still intertwined with hers. He did not say anything, but he held her hand tightly and hugged her even tighter. If this was a dream, he would continue to have this dream with her until the end of time. The journey was dreamy, accompanied by the accompaniment of the heavenly music. Finally, the flower car filled with happiness slowly landed in front of the Fantion Palace. The auspicious air in front of the Fantion Palace was steaming, and it was filled with various guests who came to congratulate them. At the moment when the flower car landed, not only were there 2 colored flowers falling to greet them, but there was also a thunderous applause. Ning Xuemo was held by Shinjioli as they walked out of the flower car. Then, Ning Xuemo finally saw her son. Little Nianma was wearing a handsome and beautiful bright golden robe today. He was carrying a flower basket in his small hand, and there were 2 groups of children behind him. One group was a group of maidens, and the other group was a group of boys. The maidens were wearing snow-white fairy dresses, and the boys were wearing sky-blue robes. Every child was as beautiful as an angel in a painting. When little Nianma led them to walk over, they were particularly eye-catching. The flower boys were led by little Nianma. Little Nianma was holding a big bouquet of flowers in his hands. The bouquet was made of rare moonflowers. It was as if he was holding a big bouquet of the moon in his hands. There were even star grass as embellishments. It was beautiful beyond words. Little Nianma handed the bouquet of flowers to Ning Xuemo. His eyes were as big as the moon. Mother, happy marriage and happy birthday. It turned out that this was the gift that little Nianma prepared for her. It was indeed special. Ning Xuemo took the bouquet and looked at her son's fair and tender face. She had the urge to hug him and take a bite. Standing next to little Nianma was a beautiful little girl. She had a pair of big eyes that were so bright that they looked like they were carved from jade. Whose child was this? She would be a good wife for little Nianma. Ning Xuemo pondered. Shinjioli held her hand and said to her with a smile, Children and grandchildren will have their own fate. Don't try to match them up. Ning Xuemo glanced at him. Was this guy a roundworm in her stomach? He actually guessed what she was thinking about so quickly. Alright, she was just thinking about it. She looked up at the Fantion Palace and was moved. The layout of the Fantion Palace had completely changed. Whether it was the gate or the courtyard walls, they had all changed. Although the original style was grand enough, it always gave a cold feeling and lacked the warmth of a home. The current style was a combination of both, and even had a dreamy color. Ning Xuemo liked it at first sight. Chapter 23:20. At this moment, the gate of the Fantion Palace was wide open. In order to accommodate the guests, all the restrictions were removed. The people who came to congratulate the wedding could enter and leave freely. Of course, only a part of the entrance was allowed to enter and exit freely. It was the part that led to the main hall of the Fantion Palace. The Divine Lord liked to be quiet and clean, so the other parts of the Fantion Palace were not open to the public. The wedding officially began. The music began to play. Little Nyenma and the little girl who was walking beside him flew together. A pair of snow-white wings even spread out on the back of the little girl. The two of them flew forward in the air and sprinkled fragrant petals along the way. The other children followed behind them and sprinkled flowers in the air. It was a beautiful scene. Shinjioli held Ningxiuma's hand as they walked on the road. Their clothes fluttered in the wind. The entire wedding scene was perfect. When the two of them walked on the platform that was specially built for the wedding, the atmosphere of the whole scene was pushed to the peak. The Divine Lord and the Great Devil were already at the top of the continent. Naturally, they did not bow to the heavens and the earth like ordinary couples. Shinjioli and Ningxiuma only symbolically bowed to the heavens. They did not kneel but only bowed. Then, the couple bowed to each other. There was nothing wrong with this bow. Ningxiuma followed Shinjioli's path. After symbolically bowing to the heavens and the earth, Ningxiuma straightened up. Suddenly, a line of words appeared in her mind. I think when you bow to your parents, you can bow to me. Ningxiuma was stunned. She glanced at the corner of the high platform and saw a white stone that was squatting there. At the moment, it was shining with resentment. Ningxiuma was speechless. The high platform was decorated splendidly with many things. She directly ignored this inconspicuous stone just now. Shinjioli naturally also received the resentment of the Heavenly Law Stone, but he was too lazy to care about it and directly ignored it. The Heavenly Law Stone's heart was a little hurt. Suddenly, the white light shone brightly. It almost blinded the eyes of the audience below the stage. Then, in the white light, it flew up with a swoosh and circled above everyone's heads like a small mountain, causing the people below to cry out in alarm. Then, as if it had found the feeling, it flew away proudly with a swoosh. Before it left, Shinjioli and Ningxiuma each had a line of words in their minds. You will regret this. Ningxiuma. She found it a little funny. The Heavenly Tao Stone was behaving like a child throwing a tantrum. She transmitted her voice to Shinjioli. Where did it fly to? Should he go and coax it later? After all, it represents the Heavenly Tao, and it even allowed you to be reborn. Shinjioli didn't take it to heart. Don't worry about it. It often has this kind of temper. The Heavenly Tao Stone conveyed the will of the Heavenly Tao, and he was the guardian of the Heavenly Tao. The two of them were actually equal, so he naturally didn't need to worship it. Besides, this arrogant stone was often angered by him. Usually, it would be fine after 3 to 5 days. The people below the stage looked at each other. No one thought that a stone could grow legs and fly away with a swoosh. Of course, this was just a small episode. Shinjioli didn't take it to heart. The guests were surprised for a while, but they also forgot about it. After the ceremony, it was time to throw the bouquet. According to the saying of the celestial demon's continent, whoever caught the bouquet thrown by the bride would be able to find a good partner. Therefore, when Baizé, who was acting as the MC, shouted, "Bride, please throw the bouquet to spread your good fortune." Then, the unmarried men and women below rushed to the front of the stage. They all wanted to catch the bouquet and be tainted by the Devil Lord's happiness. Chapter 23-21. The crowd below the stage was bustling with noise and excitement. Ningxiuma glanced down and saw Yi Tianli standing far away from the crowd. His figure looked a little bleak. She was tempted and wanted to throw the bouquet to him, hoping that his red Luan star would move and find the woman he was destined to. She turned around according to the rules, with her back facing the crowd. She took a deep breath and threw the bouquet high up in the air. With her ability, she could naturally throw the bouquet to whoever she wanted. However, there were too many people below the stage, and there were too many masters. If she threw the bouquet too low, it was possible that someone would use a spell to intercept the bouquet midway, so she threw it very high. However, it was too high. The bouquet flew directly into the sky and into the clouds. Thousands of pairs of eyes were looking up at the sky. Everyone was ready to catch the bouquet when it fell. Then, the crowd waited for a while, but the bouquet did not fall. Ning Xuema was also somewhat puzzled. She couldn't have thrown it too far and ended up in outer space, right? She didn't seem to have used that much strength. At most, she could only fly up into the clouds and land on Yi Tianli's head. Shen Jiuli's expression changed. He waved his sleeve to the sky and the floating clouds in the sky disappeared instantly. A person appeared in midair. He was dressed in a loose, light purple robe that concealed his figure. A ghost mask covered his face, and he was holding the bouquet of flowers that everyone had been waiting for. Everyone was angry. They were waiting on the ground obediently. They did not expect that there would be someone in the sky who bought a ticket. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. This was the mysterious person who was elusive. He actually appeared here. The mysterious person looked a little innocent. He looked at the bouquet in his hand and then looked at the two people who had just finished bowing on the stage. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm just passing by. I have no intention of snatching this bouquet. May I know who you want to throw this bouquet to? I can throw it to you on your behalf." Ning Xuema was speechless. Naturally, she couldn't say that she wanted to throw the flower to Yi Tianli, so she just vaguely replied, "I'm just throwing it for good luck. It belongs to whoever gets it. Since Your Excellency has received it, it proves that this flower is fated with Your Excellency. Now that this flower is Your Excellency's, you can do whatever you want with it." This was originally just a prize, so it didn't matter who it was given to. "I don't know how to move the red Luan star, so I'll just throw it to the person who knows how to move the red Luan star. This humble one will toss it again to see who this flower is truly fated with." After the mysterious man finished speaking, he waved his hand and the bouquet of flowers spun in the air and fell into the crowd. Countless hands in the crowd reached out desperately, but unexpectedly, just as the bouquet was about to fall into the crowd, a sudden gust of wind blew. The gust of wind blew the bouquet in one direction like a whirlwind. Then, with a bang, it hit a person's head. Shen Nianma was standing outside the field to watch the show. He was blinded by the gust of wind and was rubbing his eyes. He did not expect that a flower would fall from the sky and hit his head. He hurriedly grabbed it, but when he saw the bouquet in his hand, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he angrily looked at the sky. It was very immoral to throw things from the sky. The mysterious man seemed to have not expected that the flower that he casually threw would hit a little kid. For a moment, he was also stunned. When Shen Nianma looked up and stared at him, he was also looking at him. Their eyes met in the air. Chapter 23-22. Shen Nianma suddenly felt that he was being penetrated by the mysterious person's gaze. He could even feel that the mysterious person was looking at him with a very complicated gaze. It was so complicated that he could not understand it. However, this could also be his illusion. After all, the mysterious person was wearing a mask. His facial features were all covered, and his eyes were also behind the mask. Shen Nianma could not see his eyes at all. "I am sorry." The mysterious person finally moved his gaze away and said so casually. He turned around and disappeared. He came quickly and left quickly as well. Initially, everyone wanted to congratulate the lucky man who got the flower. However, they could not bring themselves to congratulate him when they saw the adorable face of little Nyenma. The bride's bouquet could only be exchanged twice. If it was exchanged more than twice, it would lose its auspicious effect. Yi Tianli was not a person who cared about trifles. He waved the fan in his hand and congratulated little Nyenma. Nyenma, congratulations on receiving this flower. Congratulations on your red Luan star. Little Nyenma looked at the flower in his hand and then looked at Yi Tianli. He was quite puzzled and asked, "What is the red Luan star? Can it help me improve my kung fu?" Yi Tianli was speechless. Ning Xuema looked at her son who was holding the flower. She also felt a deep pain in her stomach. Little Nyenma was only 6 months old. How could he already have a red Luan star? It was too early. Shenjiuli's gaze also fell on his son. His eyes were slightly deep as if he was speculating about something. Ning Xuema seemed to have thought of something. She whispered to Shenjiuli, who was next to her, "What is the meaning of this moonflower?" "Reunion." Shenjiuli spat out 2 words. Ning Xuema was relieved. "The meaning of this flower is good. Aren't we reunited as a family?" Shenjiuli glanced at the direction where the mysterious person went. There was a flash of deep thought in his eyes, but then he smiled and said softly, "You are right. Our family is reunited." The red cloud-like wedding canopy hung down quietly. The wedding room was decorated beautifully and stylishly. Ning Xuema curiously looked at everything in the room. This should be Shenjiuli's former bedroom, but the original bedroom was gone. This bedroom was obviously newly built. Not only was this palace newly built, but all the buildings in the Fantian Palace were also newly built. Although the style had changed greatly, it was still very ingenious. As Ning Xuema walked along the way, she only felt that the layout of every place was very much to her liking. "Guru, why did you change all the buildings in Fantian Palace?" Ning Xuema asked Shenjiuli, who had just finished drinking wine with her. The wine was very strong, and her snow-white face was flushed red because of the alcohol. Shenjiuli looked at her with deep eyes and raised his arms to hold her in his arms. "The original one is dirty and doesn't meet your aesthetic standards." Ning Xuema's heart moved. She naturally understood what Shenjiuli meant by dirty. Luo Jiuqin had lived here for a period of time. Although there were many places he couldn't enter, he still lived in Fantian Palace and even regarded himself as the owner. With Shenjiuli's misophobia, he naturally couldn't tolerate this. He simply destroyed and rebuilt Fantian Palace according to her preferences. With such a husband, what more could a woman ask for? Ning Xuema couldn't help but raise her head and kiss him on the cheek. "Guru, thank you." Before she could finish her sentence, his lips kissed hers. His voice was hoarse but full of temptation. "I don't accept other forms of thanks. Give me a real one." Chapter 23-23. The ambiguous atmosphere in the room gradually increased. In the deep kiss, the corolla on Ning Xuema's head was removed by Shenjiuli. Her long hair flowed like water and fell on her gradually bare shoulders. In the midst of an intense and deep kiss, he carried her. When Ning Xuema regained her senses, she had already landed on the big warm and soft bed. The wedding dress that was so difficult to take off unexpectedly left her body and flew out of the bed curtain in an instant, leaving only a thin set of underwear on her body. Her heart was beating like thunder. Although Ning Xuema had been entangled with him for 3 lifetimes and had rolled in the bed a few times, as Ning Xuema, the chances of rolling in the bed with the great god in this lifetime were pitifully few. Other than that time when they used force, the two of them had never been officially intimate. The few times that Ning Xuema had left a deep impression on her were after she transmigrated and the great god from 50,000 years ago. Those few times were like a dream to her. Only this moment was the most real. Although his kiss was restrained, it was like a violent storm that wanted to completely engulf her. It made it hard for her to breathe. After being tossed around for 3 lives, his skill in this aspect was extremely high. Very quickly, Ning Xuema was completely defeated by his teasing. The blood in her body boiled, and her originally snow-white skin turned a light pink. Her cheeks were flushed red, and her eyes seemed to be watery. Finally, the last piece of cloth was removed from her body. Her black hair was spread out below her, and her sparkling and translucent jade-like body was pressed against the fiery red bedding. White on white, red on red, contrasting with a kind of soul-stirring beauty. Shinjiuli took a deep breath. His eyes were as deep as the unfathomable sea. There were waves surging in his eyes, wanting to completely sweep her away. The blood in his body was surging. His blood was like boiling lava that was screaming to erupt. In an instant, it ignited each other's passion. Xuema, his voice was low and hoarse like the waves rolling in from afar. He lifted one of her legs. Call me husband. Ning Xuema looked at him with her watery eyes. She naturally knew what was waiting for her. Even she herself was looking forward to this moment. After reuniting with him for such a long time, she was also eager to feel each other's true feelings. But she seemed to be a virgin again. Seeing that he was about to bring the storm over, she couldn't help but push his chest with her hand and said in a trembling voice, You have to be gentler. Shinjiuli hugged her and whispered in her ear, Don't worry, Xuema, I will give you a wedding night that you will never forget. It was a stormy night. Ning Xuema felt that this was indeed an unforgettable wedding night, but the most unforgettable thing was not how many times they went to the mountains together, but the shock of the next morning. Initially, Shinjiuli had been tormenting her until dawn. Before she could fall asleep, she was awakened by the sound of the door being slammed open. Before she could react, the door was slammed open by someone. A small figure rushed in directly. Fortunately, Shinjiuli reacted quickly. He wrapped Ning Xuema in his arms tightly with the quilt and put a set of clothes on his body automatically. Mother, Lord Father. The little one rushed towards the bed curtains. Shinjiuli waved his sleeve, and the little one stopped moving. Father. The little one's face was red, and his eyes were full of confusion. Get out. Shinjiuli spat out 2 words. With another wave of his sleeve, little Nianma was directly teleported out of the bedroom. Chapter 23-24. Shinjiuli turned around and patted the blanket that was wrapped around Ning Xuema. Don't be afraid. Wait for me here. I want to see what is wrong with this boy. He turned around and walked out of the room. Ning Xuema's face was burning under the blanket. Her son had almost seen her parents' private moment. It was strange. The boy usually woke up late. Why did he wake up so early today? She even had tears in her eyes, as if she had been frightened by something. She wanted to put on her clothes and go out to sea, but her body was so sore that she did not even want to move her fingers. He struggled in his blanket for a while, but he didn't manage to get up. He simply lay back down and listened to the movements outside. After a while, she could not help but laugh. It turned out that little Nianma had a nightmare. He actually dreamed that the mysterious man with the ghost face was looking at him from outside his bed. The deep gaze made his hair stand on end. He opened his eyes and found that he was still in his own Qingshao palace. He was the only one in the palace. He remembered the gaze of the mysterious man in the dream and felt a chill in his heart. He could no longer stay calm and ran to his parents' room to seek protection. Shinjiuli listened to him quietly. He directly took the little boy out and said calmly, "It is just a nightmare. Is it worth making a fuss? If you are a man, you should stay calm." Little Nyenma was a little embarrassed by his father's scolding, but he was not convinced. "I am a boy now, not a man. A man should be trained from a young age." Shinjioli took him back. "Well, I will be a good man in the future." "Father, I am still sleepy." Little Nyenma's voice was still full of sleepiness. "Go back to your Qingshao palace if you are sleepy." "But I am scared. I always feel that there is a pair of eyes staring at me." Little Nyenma was still afraid. "It is just a psychological effect. Let's go. I will send you back." "No, father. Can you let Nyenma sleep with both of you? Nyenma does not take up much space. A small bed is enough." Little Nyenma still wanted to fight for his rights. "No. You've grown up and can no longer sleep with your parents." Shinjioli sternly refused. "But mother has promised me yesterday." Little Nyenma was not convinced. "I have the final say in this matter." Shinjioli only replied with a few words before he took the boy out. The conversation between the father and son gradually faded away. Ning Xuema couldn't help but rub her forehead. She didn't expect to get married so soon, so she casually agreed to her son's request. Speaking of which, why did his son have nightmares? The Fantian Palace was always shrouded in a divine aura, and there were also 8 divine beasts guarding it. No evil beings could enter, so it shouldn't be the work of any evil beings. Could it be that he was startled by the bouquet of flowers that the mysterious man threw on his head yesterday? It should be. While she was lost in thought, a gentle breeze blew through the hole. Shinjioli had returned and appeared directly in the inner hole. He lifted the bed curtain and got on the bed. He directly hugged Ning Xuema in his arms. "Why don't you sleep more?" Ning Xuema shook her head. "I can't sleep." She was still worried about the mysterious man. "Great Master, have you checked the Nyenma Palace? Is there anything wrong?" Shinjioli shook his head slightly. "There is nothing wrong. There is only Nyenma's aura in the palace." Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the little guy really had an unintentional dream. However, when she thought of the bouquet of flowers, she still felt a little uneasy. The bouquet of flowers that the mysterious man threw just happened to hit her son's head. Could it mean that her son and the mysterious man were fated? Chapter 23-25. Don't. Although she had read a few novels and did not look down on the protagonists, she still did not want her son to have any relationship with a man. Who is the mysterious man with the ghost face? Ning Xuema was still very curious. She did not have all the memories of Xuema in her previous life, so she did not know much about the people in this continent. She only occasionally heard about this mysterious man from General Manager Himu. No one really knew the background of this mysterious man. They only knew that he was very powerful and was very mysterious. He was also very low-key and never fought for power. He was really a mysterious man. Because this man did not care about fame and fortune, no one really investigated him. Even General Manager Himu, who was always very well informed, did not find out anything about him. Originally, Ning Xuema did not care about this mysterious man. However, this mysterious man had passed by her twice and scared little Nyenma once. This time, she could not ignore it even if she wanted to. Shinjioli pondered for a moment and did not care. Don't care who he is. As long as he is harmless to us, it is fine. Ning Xuema was once bitten, twice shy. It is hard to say that he is not malicious to us. I always feel that he is not as simple as he seems. Little Nyenma's nightmare is also a little strange. Shinjioli kissed her lips. Don't worry. I know what to do. Her lips were like the most delicate petals. Shinjioli only wanted to kiss her gently, but he did not expect that he could not let go after the touch. Early in the morning was the time when men were most easily excited. At this moment, he was holding the person he had been thinking about day and night. Even Shinjioli was a little bit unable to control himself. Of course, he did not want to control himself. After a deep kiss, both of them were panting. Ning Xuemo's beautiful face was bright red. Her eyes were watery as if there was a pool of autumn water in them. His eyes were also full of water, like the turbulent sea. Xuemo, since you're not sleepy yet, let's do something more meaningful. Shinjioli propped himself up and looked down at her. His eyes were filled with surging waves. Ning Xuemo wanted to protest, but he sealed her lips with a kiss. The bed curtains were pulled down again, covering the entire room. If Ning Xuemo was asked to describe the days after their marriage, she could only describe them with 8 words, sweet, and her waist hurt a little. It wasn't easy for the two of them to be together. Naturally, they were together day and night and couldn't bear to be apart for even a moment. As for little Nianmo, who was finally reunited with his family, he was a little miserable. His father probably wanted to make up for the fatherly love that he had missed out on for the past 6 months. His schedule was packed to the brim with training, martial arts, and studying. Aside from sleeping at night, there was no time for him to rest. Little Nianmo was about to cry because of his fatherly love. Moreover, when he slept at night, he could no longer get into his mother's arms because there was a new wizardry barrier in his father's bedroom. He could no longer break in directly. Not only could the wizardry barrier prevent him from entering, but it could also block his voice. One night, he was so angry that he simply scratched the door for the whole night. However, there was no movement inside at all. He felt wronged and angry at the same time. He felt that his parents did not love him anymore and allowed him to cry outside. He simply fell asleep outside the door. He wanted to see if his mother would feel sorry for him when she saw him sleeping outside the door the next day. Then, if his mother felt sorry for him, he could openly sleep with his mother at night. His little abacus was crackling and rattling, but... Chapter 23-26. His little abacus crackled loudly, but when he woke up, he found that he was not sleeping outside his parents' bedroom, but on a big rock. The breeze was rather chilly. He sneezed and looked around. Then, he realized that there were a lot of rocks around him. All kinds of big stones were arranged high and low under the moonlight. They looked like giants looking down at him. Where was this? He did not remember that there was such a stone slope in the Fantion Palace. Little Nianmo jumped up. He was short, and the stones were too tall. They blocked his view. He looked at the tallest stone not far away and decided to jump on it to have a better look. With his Qing Gong, it was easy for him to jump on a big stone. However, he did not expect that he would hit a wizardry barrier when he jumped less than 10 feet high. He was bounced back and fell on his butt. Shin Nianmo was speechless. He seemed to have suddenly understood something. He clenched his little fists tightly. This must be his father's masterpiece. His father must have heard him scratching the door and crying. He must have thought that he was too noisy. In order to punish him, he locked him in the array. Fortunately, he had seen this array before. In order to train him, his father had taught him how to break the array. He also locked him in several arrays to train him. This array was one of them. Although this array was complicated, since he had broken it once, he could naturally break it a second time. Little Nianmo clenched his fists. However, after he broke out of the array this time, he must complain to his mother during lunch. With this thought in mind, little Nianmo began to break the array. He was a genius with memory. He would not forget any array that he had broken. He would not make any mistakes. He could break out of this array in less than 2 hours. He looked up at the moon above his head and calculated the time. He estimated that when he broke out of the array, the sky would be slightly brighter. Perhaps he could still make it in time to greet his mother. 2 hours later, Shen Nianma squatted under a stone. He looked around in disbelief. There seemed to be more stones around, and there was even fog in the array. Ning Xuema had practiced kung fu to this level. In fact, she could already abstain from eating, but she liked the feeling of eating together with her family. Therefore, she had to eat a meal every day for the past few days. What's more, those dishes were all prepared by Shinjiuli. Every dish was delicious, and she wanted to have a second bite after the first. The Almighty's delicious food was a temptation that she couldn't resist. In the past few days, Shen Nianma, who was exhausted by his homework, would always come to her and have a meal with her. He would always talk about things that interested him. However, this time, the dishes were served neatly, and the aroma of the food lingered in the air, but little Nianma was still nowhere to be seen. Ning Xuema was puzzled. She asked the Almighty who was sitting beside her, "Where is Nianma? Why don't I see him today?" Shinjiuli peeled a prawn for her and put it on her plate. Calmly, he said, "Nianma is practicing the art of breaking the array. He has forgotten to eat and sleep. I don't think he will come for dinner today." Ning Xuema was pleased. Her son was actually so hardworking. She was also a secret agent. She knew that strict requirements were the only way to train a real talent. Of course, she would not object to her son being so hardworking. She nodded and did not ask any more. However, she still cared about her son. She saved a good fruit for her son. She was going to wait for her son to come out of the array. Chapter 23-27. In fact, 3 days had passed. Ning Xuema had left 3 peaches of immortality for her son, but her son was still nowhere to be seen. She was a little worried, so she asked Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli was drinking tea. He poured her a cup of tea and then turned the teacup for her to speculate. This time, in order to train his observation and distinguishing ability, I deliberately changed the array that he had been through. Perhaps, he did not notice the subtle difference between the 2 arrays and went to the fork. Ning Xuema was speechless. She drank the tea and asked him curiously, "What do you mean by subtle difference? What is the difference?" Shinjiuli thought for a moment and said, "For example, there is a small crack in the hexagonal stone where the eye of the array was, and there is a 2-inch tall grass at the original life gate." Ning Xuema was speechless. She knew about Shinjiuli's array. When she was Shinjiuli's disciple, he had locked her in there. There were piles of irregular stones, hexagonal stones, octagonal stones, oval stones, and pentagonal stones. All of them were natural stones. The wrinkles on the stones were finer than chrysanthemum petals. It was comparable to the wrinkles on an 80-year-old woman's face. If there was a small crack on the stones, no one would notice it. As for the grass, it was everywhere. If there were hundreds of grass at the life gate, and there was one more, even she would not notice it, let alone Shen Nianma. Poor son. If he relied on his old experience to break through the array, he would be dragged into the ditch. No wonder he could not get out after so long. Nianma was still so young. Was it really good to let him break through such a complicated array? Did the master really want to train his son's ability to break through the array? Or did he think that the boy was a third wheel and sent him away? Is there any food in the array? Ning Xuema was a little worried when she thought of her son who had not eaten for 3 days. Don't worry. In the array, he will be fine even if he does not eat for half a month. Moreover, he has practiced the immediate technique. It will not be a problem for him to last for a month. Shen Yanma had spent 3 days and 3 nights in this godforsaken stone array. He did not have the fragrant food that his father cooked. There was no mother's warm embrace and caress. He was the only one who stayed in the stone formation, guarding a pile of broken stones and studying them. When he was tired, he would fall asleep on the big stone and continue studying when he woke up. In the past few days, he had cried and rolled on the ground. Since there was no one around, he did not have to worry about his image as the Son of God. But no matter how much he cried or threw a tantrum, it was to no avail. Instead, there were more and more stones around him, and the fog was getting thicker and thicker. He finally understood that the ruse of self-injury was useless against his father. If he wanted to get out, he could only rely on himself. He didn't know why, but he always felt that someone was watching him, but he couldn't find that person even after using his telekinesis for a long time. He rolled his eyes and instantly understood. It must be his father watching him from outside the array. He couldn't give up like this. He had to get out. He couldn't let his father look down on him. Therefore, he wiped his tears, patted his little robe and stood up. He continued to stare bitterly at the pile of broken stones, trying to figure out how to break the formation. In fact, Shen Yanma thought too much. His father could not wait to stick to his mother every day, so how could he have the time to visit him? Someone else was looking at him. On the big stone outside the stone formation stood a man in black. His face was covered by a pitch-black ghost mask. Chapter 23-28. He was wearing a black mask with a grimace on it. His pure black robe was embroidered with dark patterns with golden threads, which made him look luxurious and domineering. There was a strange jade pendant hanging on his waist, which shone with unpredictable light under the sunlight. At this moment, he stood still on the big rock and looked at the giant stone array not far away. He also looked at the little kid who was running around in the array. The jade pendant on his waist flashed. The man in black looked at the jade pendant with a complicated expression. Poof! The wizardry barrier was broken, and a little kid with a face like a little cat came out. He stood like a little teapot with his hands on his waist and laughed loudly. Ha ha ha! I am out! The kid was Shen Yanma. It took him 3 days to finally get out of the stone array. How could he not be happy? Shen Yanma was laughing without caring about his image. Suddenly, he felt someone quietly looking at him. He was shocked and immediately looked over. A pitch-black ghostly face, a pitch-black outer robe, and that eternally complicated gaze. It was the person who hit his head with the flower. It was the person who stood in front of his bed and scared him in the middle of the night. It was the person who gave him nightmares for several days. Run! When Shen Yanma saw the person, this was the only thought in his mind. He was so scared that he took a step back. However, he stepped on a small stone and slipped, falling back into the array. The man in black was speechless. Shen Yanma was speechless. Looking at the familiar crumpled stones around him and looking at the gradually gathering thick fog, Shen Yanma wanted to cry but had no tears. He swore that he would never forgive that person. The moon was shining brightly. Shen Yanma broke out of the array again. This time, he was not so arrogant. He carefully poked his little head out of the wizardry barrier and looked around. After making sure that the man in black was not around, he was relieved and jumped out boldly. After jumping out, he seemed to be a little worried. He used his telekinesis to check the surroundings again to make sure that there was no aura of the man in black. He then sighed with relief and made a peace sign with his hand. He ran back to the Fantion Palace with a smile. Above the clouds, the black-clothed man stood with his hands behind his back. He looked down at the cautious figure below and heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he flew up to the clouds in time. Otherwise, he would have scared the little kid back to the array. He lowered his head and looked at the shining jade pendant on his waist. The jade pendant was actually engraved with 8 mythological beasts. The azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, the black tortoise. The 8 mythological beasts were all facing the center. In the center, there was a sparkling and translucent ball. It was that ball that had been flashing recently. It was not until little Nienma was far away that the jade returned to its normal color. He simply sat down on the big rock. His hand, which had been hidden in his sleeve, finally stretched out. He took the jade pendant from his waist and held it between his 2 fingers. His fingers looked as if they were carved from jade. The shape of his hand was extremely beautiful, making people want to touch it. That jade was sparkling and translucent, and that hand was white and translucent. Under the contrast of the two, it seemed as if they were both transparent. He looked at the jade for a moment and suddenly sighed softly. He raised his hand as if he was going to rub his eyebrows, but the moment he touched the mask, he stopped. Was it him? Let's observe for a while longer. Little Nienma was smart enough to realize that as long as he did not stick to his mother at night, his father would be very nice to him. The homework that he assigned during the day was also not too much. Chapter 23-29. Little Nienma was smart enough to realize that as long as he did not stick to his mother at night, his father would be very kind to him. The homework assigned to him during the day was not too much, and he even had time to swim in the lake for half a day. Even his father's gaze towards him was filled with love and affection. Once he threw a tantrum, he would definitely sleep with his mother, and his father would be unhappy. Of course, his father had always been a man of few words. Even if he was unhappy, he would not show it. He just looked at him with a smile that was not a smile for a long time, and then quietly increased the intensity of the training. If the original amount of practice was the wool of a sheep, then the increased amount of practice was the hair of a fat cow. It was a few times. Little Nienma could not finish it, so he was thrown into a certain array as a punishment. It was only natural that he would be thrown into a certain array to revise. Little Nienma had experienced it twice and summed it up. Once, he was so angry that he ran to his mother to complain. He said that his father was using his position to avenge a private grudge by depriving him of the opportunity to enjoy his mother's love. He even shook his mother's sleeve and said that his mother had promised him that she would sleep with him, so she couldn't go back on her words. What his father was doing now was framing his mother. Little Nienma had read a lot of books, so he could talk a lot. Ning Xuema felt that her son was right. Since she had promised her child, she could not go back on her words. Therefore, that night, she deliberately brought Nienma to Shinjiuli's study to tell him about her son's thoughts. Then, she discussed with Shinjiuli that she would sleep with her son every other day. Her son was still so young, so he could not be deprived of maternal love. When the child was 1 year old, she would let her son sleep alone. Little Nienma thought that his mother's suggestion was a good one and also a very normal one. The children in the celestial kingdom would only be separated from their mothers after they were 1 year old. Some spoiled children would be separated even later, and even slept together until they were 2 years old. At that time, Shinjiuli was helping Ning Xuema to review the documents in Mo Palace in the study room. When he heard what Ning Xuema said, he smiled and looked at Shin Nienma. Shin Nienma felt a chill down his spine as if he was being stared at by a lion. It turned out that Shin Nienma's intuition was very accurate. He only slept comfortably with his mother for 1 night, but the next day, the difficulty of his homework suddenly doubled. Not only that, but his father had also developed a new array formation. Using the excuse of letting him test the array formation, he directly threw him into the array formation and couldn't come out for a few days and nights. Breaking formations was the best way to improve one's abilities. Not only did he have to identify the path of the array, but he also had to fight with the monsters that appeared out of nowhere. The level of the monsters would also increase along with Little Nianmao's power. Little Nianmao's kung fu would improve significantly after he broke the array. Although his mother loved him, she did not spoil him. Perhaps it was because both of them had suffered too much during those days, so his mother also wanted to train him to be a talent. Therefore, she turned a blind eye to the training that his father gave him, as long as he did not lose his life and did not really hurt him. In this way, although Little Nianmao fought for the benefit of letting his mother sleep with him every other day, the opportunity to really enjoy this benefit was very rare. It could be said that it was only once in a while. Little Nianmao sat on a big branch of a big tree and looked up at the moon in the sky. He always felt a little uncomfortable. Chapter 23:30. This time, the array formation was an endless tropical rainforest. The rainforest was full of swamps, and there was no place to stand. There were all kinds of monsters in the rainforest, including crocodiles, poisonous snakes, and lizards. There was also a big poisonous mosquito that gave Little Nianmao a headache. It kept buzzing in his ears, and if he was not careful, it would bite him and leave a few red marks on his tender skin. The weather in the rainforest was very strange. One moment, the sun was hot on his head, and the next moment, it was cloudy with heavy rain. This time, the array formation that his father set for him was particularly bad. He could not use any spells in it, and could only rely on his physical strength. Whether it was killing monsters or walking, he had to rely on his real kung fu. Once they had gotten used to using spells, they would no longer pay attention to their physical training. Little Nianmao was a genius in spells, but he was lazy when it came to physical training. After being thrown into the array, Little Nianmao suffered a lot. He was often chased by all kinds of monsters. If he did not pay attention, he would be drenched by the rain. The air in the rainforest was humid. After being wet, without the support of spells, it was difficult for his clothes to dry. Just like now, he was riding on a branch and relying on the wind blowing through the forest to dry his clothes. A breeze blew past, causing him to sneeze. He hugged his arms and felt that the wind was a little gloomy. He looked down again and tapped his temples with his small hand. He had already been trapped in this lousy array for 7 days. However, he still had no clue. When could he get out? Rumble. His stomach was growling again. In this crazy forest, not only could he not use any spells, but even the fasting spell did not work here. He was easily hungry, and he did not have any dry food with him. If he wanted to fill his stomach, he could only rely on himself to hunt. The animals in the forest were more agile than monkeys. It was not easy to hunt, and it took him a long time to hunt one. A pair of small green eyes flashed under the tree. Little Nianmao rushed down like a little wolf. A moment later, he caught a small wild boar that was also hungry. Although it was called a small wild boar, it was not small. It was about 50 kilograms. Little Nianmao swung his sword and killed the little boar. Wild boar meat wasn't tasty, but the baby boar tasted better. The meat from this wild boar was enough for him to eat for 2 days. His technique was very fast. A moment later, he cut off the good meat from the wild boar and threw the skeleton on the spot to attract other carnivores. He brought the meat to another place. This was the standard way to survive in the wild. There were many carnivores in the forest, including leopards, tigers, wolves, and other large animals. If he didn't dispose of the food he hunted quickly, the smell of blood would attract other carnivores and snatch the fruits of his labor. Therefore, Little Nianmao finally learned his lesson after a few failures. As long as he could hunt for food, he would run away after slicing the meat and find a safe place to roast it. Not only was hunting difficult, but the most difficult thing was making a fire. The wood here was so damp that water could drip out, and he didn't have any spells to use, so he could only use the most stupid method to make a fire. Little Nianma was hitting the 2 stones with all his might. He used the sparks to ignite the half-dry firewood that he had spent a lot of effort to dry with his internal power. The process was very difficult. Little Nianma was busy for a long time, but he still could not ignite the fire. Instead, he was so hungry that his legs were weak, and his vision was blacked out. No wonder his mother said that survival in the wild was a test of one's ability. It was true. If only the fire could be preserved, I will help you ignite the fire, and you can share half of your meat with me. How about that? Suddenly, a voice came from above little Nianma. Chapter 23:31. Little Nianma raised his head. When he saw who it was, he was so shocked that his fingers trembled. The small flame that he had tried so hard to ignite was extinguished by the man's stone. The man was dressed in black, almost the same color as the night sky. Only the mask on his face was red. It was still the same ghost mask, but this time, the ghost face looked particularly gloomy. It was the mysterious ghost face man. Although he often changed his appearance, little Nianma could still recognize him at a glance. Who was this man? Why did he always appear in his territory? Who are you? Why do you keep following me? Shin Nianma took a step back and looked at the man with vigilance. These days, he often felt that someone was watching him in the dark. Now, it seemed that it was not an illusion. The man folded his arms and only said 2 words, "I am just passing by." Passing by? Who was he kidding? He came to the Fantian Palace and was just passing by. Strange, how did this man enter the Fantian Palace? The prohibition of the Fantian Palace had been activated. Without the guidance of the family of 3, outsiders could not enter at all. How did this ghost face man come in? Could it be that his parents invited him to pass by? Since it was not invited, there was only one possibility. This man sneaked into the Fantian Palace. In this world, there was only one person who could sneak into the Fantian Palace, and that was Luo Jiuqin. Was this man Luo Jiuqin? Did he not die and came to the Fantian Palace to seek revenge? At this moment, many speculations flashed through little Nianma's mind. The man did not seem to notice little Nianma's increasing vigilance. He took out a piece of wood that looked like a big mushroom and waved it in front of little Nianma. This is the firewood. It is good at preserving the fire. If you have it, you don't have to break stones to start a fire. While he was talking, the man blew at the wood, and a flame came out of the wood. This was really a good thing. Little Nianma thought about it and decided to make an exchange with the mysterious man. A moment later, a fire was finally built. Little Nianma gave half of the wild boar meat to the man and let him roast it himself. The man did not seem to have any intention to cook the meat. Instead, he kept the meat and sat on a branch nearby to watch little Nianma roast the meat. Little Nianma had just finished grilling a skewer. He brought it to his nose and smelled it. His culinary skills were good, and the barbecued meat was fragrant. He breathed a sigh of relief and closed his eyes. When he was about to take a bite to soothe his empty stomach, he did not expect to bite on a branch. The dry and hard branch almost pricked his little mouth. He opened his eyes, and then he realized that all the flesh on his branch had disappeared. Only an empty branch was left in his hand. Little Nianma remained silent. He immediately looked at the mysterious man, only to find him sitting sideways on a tree branch, his black robe hanging down like tassels. The skewers of meat that he had roasted flew diagonally above the mysterious man as if they had grown legs. Piece by piece, they fell towards the mysterious man's mouth. The mask on the mysterious man's face had been taken off, but it still covered his face so that little Nienma could not see his face. All he could see was the meat that he had grilled disappearing. Little Nienma was furious and rushed to the mysterious man. "Give me back my meat." He had already given half of it to the mysterious man, but he still wanted to snatch it from him. The mysterious man did not move, but his body moved like a stream of water and moved to another branch. Little Nienma missed. Chapter 23:32. You didn't keep your promise. Little Nienma glared at the mysterious man and wanted to kick him away. "I only promised to give you the fire seed in exchange for half of your meat. I didn't say that I can't take the meat away from you." The man answered casually, "You can take it back if you want." "Take it back." Nonsense. That skewer of meat had already entered his stomach, so he couldn't kick it out again, right? Little Nienma looked at the man angrily for a long time. Then, his stomach growled again. "You can still roast it again," the man kindly suggested. "You can't take it anymore," Little Nienma warned. The man seemed to smile and looked at Little Nienma with a sharp gaze. "You can think of a way to prevent me from taking your meat." Little Nienma was speechless. The man's kung fu was not ordinary. It could be described as unfathomable. Little Nienma's kung fu could not be compared to his. He could probably kill him with just a little finger. In this array, Little Nienma could not even find a helper. It seemed that there was no other way to deal with such a strong man except to surrender. Little Nienma's face turned pale and red. Finally, he gave in. "How about this? I will roast 2 portions each time. One for you, and the other for me. How about that? If you don't agree, then I will not roast it. Neither of us can eat it." The man seemed to be moved. He nodded slightly and finally agreed. Therefore, Little Nienma began to roast the meat again. He roasted 2 skewers in one go. After roasting, he gave one to the mysterious man. The man looked at the skewer in his hand and said, "I want yours." Little Nienma was too lazy to argue with him and gave his skewer to him. Just like that, Little Nienma roasted the meat 4 or 5 times in a row. Each time, he let the mysterious man choose whatever he wanted. The man did not hesitate and chose the biggest one each time. Little Nienma was finally full, but there was not much left of the wild boar meat in his body after that. After he was full, he patted his little robe and stood up. The man sat on the tree and looked at him. "I have eaten so much of your meat. Logically speaking, I can help you a little. What do you need me to help you with?" Little Nienma glanced at him and shook his head. "No need." That person was a little surprised and continued to tempt him. "I might be able to help you find the array eye to break the array." Little Nienma shook his head again. "No. Let's go our separate ways." He even waved his hand at that person to say goodbye. Then, he turned around and strode away. A moment later, his small figure had already disappeared into the dense forest. That person sat there and looked at the place where his figure disappeared. He muttered to himself for a moment, then his figure rose, as if he was about to leap onto the treetops. However, he suddenly staggered and almost fell down from the tree branch. He placed his hand on his stomach, where he suddenly felt a burning pain. He was poisoned. He was poisoned. He slowly sat down with disbelief in his eyes. Needless to say, this poison was placed by the little fellow. The question was, when had he drugged him? It was obvious that he had chosen the roasted meat on the spot every time. Could it be that the little fellow had drugged every skewer of meat? Did he just take the antidote in advance? He briefly sensed his body and his fingers tightened. The poison in his body was very strong. It was a strange poison that he had never seen before. In just a moment, he could already feel that the toxicity of the poison had begun to rush crazily in his blood. If he did not find a way to cure it, he was afraid that his vitality would be damaged. Chapter 23:33. He meditated on the spot and began to exercise to expel the poison. With his kung fu, no matter how powerful the poison was, it was easy for him to expel it. He concentrated on expelling the poison. Halfway through, he suddenly sensed something and opened his eyes. He did not see anything unusual. The trees around him were tall and small, and there was a faint fragrance in the air that made one's mind ripple. No. The fragrance was strange. It was poisonous. It seemed that the little guy was determined to kill him. He was trying to poison him with all kinds of tricks. He only took a few pieces of meat from the little guy. Why would he risk his life for this? The little guy was ruthless enough. The mysterious man did not know whether to laugh or cry. He held the jade pendant in his hand and flicked it. He flicked it with his finger and said in a doubtful tone, "You didn't get the wrong person, did you?" Of course, the jade pendant would not answer him. He did not dare to stay there for too long. He endured the pain in his stomach and disappeared from the spot. A moment later, little Nianma's small figure appeared from behind a big tree. He looked at the direction where the man disappeared and pursed his lips with a proud smile. His mother was an expert in poisoning. Naturally, she passed on her poison skills to her son. Therefore, little Nianma's poison skills were superb. Few people could compare with him. Because he was often thrown into the wizardry barrier by his father, and there were all kinds of monsters in the wizardry barrier, little Nianma had a habit of carrying some poison with him just in case. He did not expect to use it this time. He did put the poison in the meat, but not in all the skewers. He only put it in one of the skewers after he understood the man's pattern of picking the meat skewers. The man picked it. Of course, he still brought the antidote with him just in case. The poison he put in was enough to kill an elephant. Moreover, the poison had a special characteristic. It would only be effective when it was activated. When little Nianma waved goodbye before he left, it was actually a way to activate the poison. That was the only way he could have a chance to escape in time. Little Nianma's mind was still very meticulous. Even the mysterious man would not be able to escape from his trap. However, the man's kung fu was too high. He did not fall under such a strong poison. Therefore, little Nianma released a second type of poison in the air. He did not expect that before the poisonous air drifted to the mysterious man, the man noticed it and ran away in time. What a pity! The man was too fast. Even if little Nianma wanted to catch up with him and give him another stab, he could not. Forget it, in any case, he had forced this person to retreat. It was more important for him to quickly find a way out. When he got out of here, he would report to his father and have him investigate this person's background. If only it wasn't Luo Jiuchen's resurrection, little Nianma began to look for a way out again. He had been trapped here for 7 days, and he had almost figured out the layout of the rainforest. As long as he continued to calculate, he should be able to find a way out. He sat in a clearing and wrote and drew pictures with a twig. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. He raised his head and looked around, but he didn't find anything. Frowning, he faintly felt that there was a pair of eyes watching him from the dark. Could it be that the mysterious man had returned? Little Nianma stood up and was about to search the place. Suddenly, he heard a gust of wind beside him. He subconsciously moved forward and dodged to the side to avoid the sudden attack from behind. Only then did he turn around to take a look, and abruptly took a step back. Not far from him, a huge black python appeared. Chapter 23-34. Divine Master, is Nianma okay in the array? Ning Xuemo looked up at the array that Shinjiuli had set up and was worried. Shinjiuli had been holding her waist. He looked up at the array and shook his head slightly. He is fine. But he has been trapped in there for 7 days. I am worried that he will be hungry. There is enough food in there. He will not be hungry as long as he is careful. Shinjiuli did not care. Although there were many beasts in the array, they could not really hurt people. Once little Nianma's life was threatened, the beasts would automatically disappear. Therefore, little Nianma should be safe in there. That was the only way to train his self-protection ability. Shinjiuli hugged her and walked away. Didn't you want to go out with me? Let's go. Ning Xuemo was still worried. Are we going to leave the child alone here? He will cry if he can't find us. Shinjiuli squinted his eyes and looked at the array again. He then shook his head. Don't worry. He will have to stay in there for 3 or 4 days. We will be back in 3 or 4 days. But, Xuemo, a loving mother will spoil her son. Shinjiuli smiled and rubbed her hair. Don't worry. He will be fine. Ning Xuemo thought about it and felt that she was worrying too much. The Fantian Palace was now their territory. Even a fly could not enter without their permission. Even if little Nianma was trapped in the array, he would be fine. She sighed. After all, he is still young. Shinjiuli did not think much of it. Young? He is now 10 months old. When I was his age, I could already take charge and be famous in the 6 realms. That was true. The Divine Master seemed to have become the master of heaven and earth when he was 1 year old. Ning Xuemo suddenly had a thought. When little Nianma was 3 months old, he looked like a 3 or 4-year-old baby. Now that he was 10 months old, he still looked like a 3 or 4-year-old baby. It seemed that he did not grow at all. He wouldn't grow abnormally slowly like her when she was young, right? However, when she was 10 months old, she looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. Was little Nianma's growth slower than hers? Ning Xuemo voiced her concerns. Shinjiuli's eyes flashed slightly, and he touched her head. Don't worry, when he should grow up, he will naturally grow up. Ning Xuemo, what did he mean by it was time to grow up? Perhaps her Nianma was like an ordinary child who grew up according to the rules of a normal person. After all, she was still an ordinary human when she was pregnant with Nianma. It did not seem right. Little Nianma could run and jump as soon as he was born, just like Neza. However, it hasn't been growing for some reason recently. Forget it. As long as the child could grow up normally, it would be fine. She did not have to ask for too much. Besides, although Nianma's height was like that of a 3 or 4-year-old, his intelligence was far beyond his peers. He had even cultivated to such a high level of kung fu. Thinking of this, she put the question aside and let Shinjiuli walk with her. When she was about to leave, she looked back at the array that was suspended in midair. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and pulled Shinjiuli's sleeve. Divine Master, I always feel that there are outsiders in our Fantian Palace. Do you have the same feeling? Shinjiuli glanced at the array, and his eyes were faintly complicated. Those who can come in are not outsiders. Ning Xuemo looked up at him. Chapter 23-35. Shinjiuli looked at her big clear eyes and could not help but kiss her forehead. He slowly changed the topic. Xuemo, I remember you said that you wanted to go to the Monster Kingdom. Ning Xuemo finally remembered the important matter. She hugged Shinjiuli's arm. You are right. Let's go to the Monster Kingdom now. Aren't you afraid that you will leave your son alone at home? Shinjuli was very satisfied with her action. He took the opportunity to hug her waist again. Aren't there 8 mythological beasts guarding here? Even if little Nyenmal comes out, he will not be too lonely. Well, let's go. Without any explanation, she pulled Shinjuli and flew straight away. Shinjuli chuckled in his heart. Even without the 8 mythological beasts, his son would not be lonely. The wheel of fate that belonged to little Nyenmal had begun to turn. It all depended on when the kid would awaken. The sky in the monster kingdom was always covered with dark clouds. From time to time, it would rain heavily. When Ning Xuema and Shinjuli arrived, there was not a single raindrop in the sky. However, after a few miles, the rain poured like a torrential downpour. Since both of them had practiced kung fu to such a level, they were naturally not afraid of heavy rain. Ning Xuema floated on the ground. The curtain of rain split behind her, and not a single drop fell on her body. She could not help but turn in a circle. Her red dress spread out in the wind like a flaming red butterfly. An umbrella appeared on top of her head. Shinjuli hugged her slender waist. You don't have to use spells. Sometimes, it is not bad to taste the normal rain in the world. To her, his embrace was always the warmest. Ning Xuema comfortably snuggled into his embrace. You're right. The two of them snuggled up against each other, sharing the same umbrella as they walked forward. The raindrops fell all around. Only under the umbrella was the peace and warmth. Ning Xuema snuggled in his arms and felt that he was quietly taking care of her. The umbrella in his hand was slightly tilted to her so that she would not be touched by the rain. The warmth came unexpectedly. It turned out that happiness was so simple. Even walking in the rain with your sweetheart could fill your heart with happiness. She had been married to him for 3 months, and it could be said that the two of them were inseparable. For the first month, she stayed in the Fantian Palace with him. He handled the official documents of the Fantian Palace for her while she sat beside him, eating melon seeds and reading books. The books in this era were naturally not as complicated as the books in the modern era, nor were they as melodramatic and interesting as the novels in the modern era. Most of them were plays between scholars and beauties. Generally, Ning Xuema would doze off and fall asleep after reading them. And every time she woke up, she would be in his arms. He was half hugging her, and that warm embrace made her sleep exceptionally comfortable. In the next 2 months, Shinjuli often took her out to travel the 6 realms. The two of them climbed mountains together, swam across the sea together, and walked around the world together as ordinary people. His days were rather carefree. In these 3 months, some changes had quietly occurred in the 6 realms. The celestial ruler of the celestial world had disappeared for a long time and did not appear again. Some fortune-tellers said that the celestial ruler was most likely dead. The celestial world could not be without a leader, so a new celestial ruler had to be appointed. With the secret help of Ning Xuema and Shinjuli, the candidate for the new celestial ruler fell on Yi Tianli's head. As for the emperor of the mortal world, the golden throne was also changed. The original emperor of the mortal world became the retired emperor with no real power and retired to enjoy the rest of his life. Only the demon world had been in chaos since Shuilan's death. Chapter 2336. Mo Palace's general manager Himu often sent letters up, saying that the demon world was starting to fight for the throne again. He begged Devil Master to appoint a king for the demon world to change the chaotic situation of the demon world. Ning Xuema didn't comment and only told them to wait. This wait had lasted until now. Ning Xuema raised her head to look at Shinjuli. His complexion was very good, and he looked like he had completely recovered. Maybe, she could beg him to do something, but would he agree? After all, he had a knot in his heart towards that person. Shinjuli suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at her. Shuemo, do you have something to say to me? Ning Shuemo paused for a moment and finally nodded. Great God, I want to ask you for a favor. What is it? Look at how chaotic the demon world is now, fighting here and there. It's not good. Shinjuli's gaze moved, and he said with a smile that wasn't a smile, so. Ning Shuemo sighed. So it's time to appoint a king for the demon world. Furthermore, it has to be a king that can suppress the demon world with one move. It's best if this person is very experienced. Shinjuli was still indifferent. In that case, who does Shuemo think is more suitable? Ning Shuemo raised her eyes to look at Shinjuli and said sincerely, Great God, I feel that Shuailan is very experienced in being a demon king and is very suitable. Shinjuli's gaze turned to her face. Isn't Shuailan's soul already scattered? Ning Shuemo took in a light breath and looked at him with hope. Great God has a way to revive him, right? Back then, Mother Earth had said that only a god could revive Shuailan. Now that the god had returned, Shuailan should be saved, right? Although she didn't have any feelings for Shuailan, he had died for her. How could she bear to let his soul dissipate? Shinjuli looked at her for a moment. Ning Shuemo knew that he had a knot in his heart about Shuailan. She was afraid that he would not agree, so she hugged his arm and explained, Guru, I know you have a knot in your heart about Shuailan, but he died for you, didn't he? Shinjuli cut her off. The Almighty was so smart. Ning Shuemo nodded. He died too tragically. Every time I think about it, I feel that I have let him down. Shinjuli looked at her and slowly opened his mouth. Shuemo, if there was a woman who once stood between you and me, and she let you down but saved my life, if she died to save me and only you have the ability to save her, would you save her? Ning Shuemo. Did she have the magnanimity to do so? She thought of Luzine. Luzine had indeed harmed her and even formed a huge obstacle between her and Shinjuli. However, Luzine had indeed treated Shinjuli well and saved his life. If Luzine died to save Shinjuli and Shinjuli begged her to save her, would she have a knot in her heart? Would she make a move? Probably not, right? The situation had been reversed. Now that she had asked Shinjuli to save Shuailan, Shinjuli would probably be unwilling to do so. To Shinjuli, it was true that Shinjuli had forced him to do this. Don't impose on others what you don't want done to you. She looked at Shinjuli's eyes that were gradually dimming. She forced a smile. If that's the case, then, just as she was about to say, then forget it, Shinjuli cut her off. I will save him. Ning Shuemo's eyes immediately lit up. She looked at him with sparkling eyes. Shuemo, other than me, I don't want you to owe anyone. Ning Shuemo's heart was filled with warmth. The Almighty had really thought of everything for her. Chapter 23:37. Ning Shuemo's heart warmed slightly. The great deity really thought of everything for her. He was afraid that she would have a knot in her heart. Even if she hated that person, he would still save them. She really liked the great deity who had such noble character and unquestionable integrity. She couldn't help but kiss him on the lips. Thank you, Almighty. Shinjuli hugged her tightly and deepened the kiss. Shuemo, I've told you before that you don't have to be polite with me. The rainstorm hit the umbrella and made a crackling sound. Under the umbrella, the two of them were completely lost in their kiss. So what if the storm was heavy? As long as the two of them could be together, they could face the storm together. Ning Shuemo was grateful to the Almighty, so she was particularly engrossed in the kiss. Shinjuli hugged his passionate wife with a smile in his eyes. If one owed someone, they would remember that person forever. He didn't want his wife to think about another man forever. The two of them were newlyweds, so such a passionate kiss could easily ignite a certain passion. His hands began to move around her body restlessly. When Ning Xuemo realized it, her belt had already been untied by him. God, they were in the wild. Small monsters could pass by at any time. Ning Xuemo hurriedly grabbed his messy hand. Don't do it here. After she finished speaking, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She turned her eyes to look and discovered that they were already inside a milky white barrier. Shinjioli pushed her down on a soft blanket. If you want to thank me, use this. I won't accept anything else. Having a man who could set up a wizardry barrier and build a love nest at will was really too shameless. She panted and resisted him. You haven't put it into action yet. Wasn't it too early to ask for compensation? Shinjioli easily removed her resistance and pinned her down. Aren't we putting it into action? He asked. Ning Xuemo was speechless. He deliberately misunderstood her. The dark underground, the swaying forest of thorns, everything seemed to have happened yesterday. That day, Shui Lan was dragged into the ground here. Not even a bone was left behind. Ning Xuemo stood on the shore, slightly lost in thought. She had been to this place before and had tried to summon Shui Lan's soul using the soul summoning technique, but to no avail. Now, her only hope was Shinjioli. When she came here that day, she was all alone and her heart was filled with despair. Now, Shinjioli was by her side. Although it was still a dark place, her heart was filled with warmth. Xuemo, his soul has been scattered. Even if I manage to gather his soul with my divine power, he may not be in perfect condition. He may not be able to remember what happened in the past. Shinjioli said bluntly. Ning Xuemo nodded. I understand. She only wanted Shui Lan to be resurrected. It was a good thing that he could not remember what happened in the past. She hoped that he could have a life that belonged to him, a love that truly belonged to him. Shinjioli glanced at Ning Xuemo and knew what she was thinking from her expression. He was relieved. He knew that Ning Xuemo did not have any feelings for Shui Lan. However, if Shui Lan was resurrected and still had his memories, it would not be a good thing for either of them. So, Shinjioli began to cast the spell. 2 hours later, a faint red soul condensed at the tip of his finger. One could barely make out the appearance of the soul when it was alive. At this moment, its eyes were closed and it swayed at the tip of his finger, as if it would dissipate at any moment. Chapter 23:38. Ning Xuemo looked at the familiar soul from the side, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Shui Lan. It was his soul. However, his soul looked very fragile, as if it could be blown away with a single breath. Ning Xuemo's tone was a little worried. His soul has been gone for too long. Although I have gathered most of it for him, a part of it has disappeared forever. I can't gather it back together again. Shinjioli explained to her in a low voice. Then, what's the consequence? He won't become a fool, right? Shinjioli shook his head slightly. His soul is incomplete. The part of his soul that is responsible for his memories has disappeared forever. If you want to revive him, you have to mend his soul. However what? After all, the soul that you mend is not his original body. Even if he wakes up in the future, I'm afraid he will be like a newborn baby. He won't remember anything of the past, like a piece of white paper. That would be a complete rebirth, right? It's good that he doesn't have all his memories. Even if he doesn't have any memories, with his intelligence and wisdom, he will still be able to accomplish something in the future. In a crystal coffin. Inside the coffin, there was a man in a green robe. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he was sleeping. There were countless strange charms drawn on the coffin. Those charms were circulating inside the coffin, reflecting his beautiful face like a painting. Ning Xuemo looked at the man in the coffin, and then looked at Shinjiuli beside her. Great God, why did you let him wear this set of clothes? Shuailan had always been wearing red robes. Now, Shinjiuli had let him wear a normal green robe. It looked a little strange. Shinjiuli glanced at her. Ning Xuemo was still wearing red. Did he have to give his love rival matching outfits? It was already good enough that he gave his love rival a set of clothes to cover his body. At least he didn't let this guy enter the coffin naked. He was already merciful. Shinjiuli raised his hand and closed the lid of the coffin. He didn't answer Ning Xuemo's question. Instead, he used his hands to draw a series of characters in the air. A moment later, a huge whirlpool appeared in the sky. Then, the crystal coffin containing Shuailan flew straight into the whirlpool, and disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuemo didn't know what he was trying to do. What are you doing? His soul is incomplete, so he needs to enter a different world to repair it. I have already sent him to a different world, where he will be resurrected at an appropriate time and begin his life. Shinjiuli explained to her. Afraid that she would be worried, he casually created a spatial mirror, which clearly showed the coffin's whereabouts. What was shown in the mirror was an island, a lonely island. The island was covered in lush trees, and the crystal coffin fell on the highest open space on the island. There were countless tombs on this open space, but the tombstones were very old and weathered. The crystal coffin fell among such tombs. The tombs were overgrown with weeds. After the crystal coffin fell, perhaps it was attracted by the spiritual power on the crystal coffin, but the weeds automatically grew in the direction of the crystal coffin. Countless vines slowly climbed up the coffin, and gradually covered the entire crystal coffin. From afar, it looked like a small emerald greenhouse, but the doors and windows couldn't be seen. What was this place? What world was it? Ning Xuemo was about to take a closer look at the words on the tombstones when the spatial mirror suddenly shook and disappeared. Ning Xuemo was shocked. She was about to ask something, but Shinjiuli had already put his arm on her shoulder and leaned on her. Chapter 2339. Ning Xuemo originally wanted to ask where it was, but she was shocked to see Shinjiuli like this. She quickly held him and asked, "Almighty, what happened to you?" Shinjiuli's face was slightly pale. He closed his eyes and said, "Xuemo, I'm a little tired. Let me rest." Ning Xuemo thought of his hard work in the past 2 days to revive Shuailan. First, he condensed his soul, then shaped his body. Then, he made a crystal coffin full of spiritual power and sent the crystal coffin to the strange world. The Almighty had worked too hard. No wonder he was so tired. Looking at his pale appearance, Ning Xuemo's heart felt both sour and soft. After thinking for a bit, she straightforwardly hugged him. "Great God, let's go back. You need to rest." The best place in the world for the Almighty to rest was the Fantion Palace. Ning Xuemo immediately carried him and ran back. She was now a devil master, and her psychokinesis was amazing. Not to mention carrying a person, she could even carry a mountain. She actually carried him like a princess. Shinjiuli laughed in his heart. If anyone saw a divine god being carried by a lady, they would be so shocked that their eyeballs would fall out of their sockets. However, he didn't care about this. He was very satisfied that Ning Xuemo was so worried about him. He thought of the graveyard shown in the space mirror and coughed softly. He actually didn't expect to throw Shuailan there. Originally, he just wanted to throw him to a strange world mountain full of spiritual power to recuperate. He didn't expect to throw him to the abandoned land of gods. It was far away from the mainland and was a place abandoned by gods. There was no one in a radius of thousands of miles. Well, the road to Shui Lan's resurrection would be very, very long. He had set a spell on Shui Lan's coffin. The person who opened his coffin would be the person who could wake him up and was also his fated person. In such a desolate place, it was harder to find a fated person than to win the lottery. Of course, he would not explain this to his wife. In any case, what he had done had indeed gathered Shui Lan's soul, giving him a chance to be reborn. Now, it all depended on whether he had the fortune to do so. He lay comfortably in Ning Xuema's arms. In order to make it easier for Ning Xuema to hug him, he deliberately made himself smaller. Tired, of course, she was a little tired, but it was far from the point where she needed someone to carry her. However, since it was rare for him to enjoy such benefits, he might as well enjoy it for a while longer. He raised his hand and quietly placed an invisibility talisman on the two of them. This way, no one would see them. By the time he returned to Fantian Palace, it was already evening. The sky was dyed red by the rosy clouds, and the barrier in the air seemed to be covered in a layer of rainbow light. Ning Xuema stopped in front of the barrier. Looking at the color of the wizardry barrier, it seemed that her sun had not broken out yet. Master, Nianma has not broken out yet. Don't you think the array you set this time is too difficult? Ning Xuema was a little worried. Shenjiuli also stared at the array for a while. It was as if he could see the scenery inside through the rolling clouds outside the array. That brat was about to break out. He had a bright future. He thought that the boy would have to explore in the array for a month. He did not expect that the boy had already found the way out after only 10 days. He will be out soon. Don't worry. In less than 3 days, he will appear in front of you alive and well. Shenjiuli comforted his wife. Ning Xuema knew that he could see the situation inside the array. When she heard what he said, she was finally relieved. She carried Shenjiuli and rushed to the quiet room. Go to the quiet room and meditate to recover. Chapter 2340. Shenjiuli's quiet room was the place with the most spiritual aura in the entire Fantian Palace. He had consumed a lot of energy, so it was best for him to meditate there. Shenjiuli did not object. In order to save Shui Lan, he had used up a quarter of his divine power. He really needed to recover. 3 days, just 3 days. The water was clear and bright, but the mountain was empty and the rain was wonderful. It was a metaphor for the West Lake, but it was also very appropriate to use it to describe the misty lake in the Fantian Palace. Ning Xuema was sitting by the lake and fishing. She wanted to wait for Shenjiuli and her son to come out so that she could nourish their bodies. The fish in the lake were not easy to catch. It required a person's concentration. Ning Xuema was a little restless today. In the bucket next to her, there was only a fish blowing bubbles. Before the Almighty went into isolation, he said that he would only need 3 days to come out. However, 5 days had passed, and he did not seem to want to come out at all. The door of the quiet room was always closed. Shenjiuli hated to be disturbed when he was in isolation. Therefore, Ning Xuema did not dare to break the door to see him. She did not want to cause him to go crazy. As for little Nianma, he was still in the array and did not show any signs of coming out. Fortunately, she had put a spell on her son. If her son was really in danger, she would be able to immediately sense it. Although she could not see what danger her son was in, she could feel that he was not uncomfortable except for a little tiredness. If that was the case, there was no need for her to break the array to save him. As for her son, it was better for him to exercise more. Ning Xuema felt a little lonely in the Fantian Palace when her husband and son were not around. Fortunately, she had a lot of interests. She did not feel that the time was very long. The first 3 days were relatively easy because she was mentally prepared to wait for 3 days. After 3 days, she was a little anxious and felt that the time was extraordinarily long. Unknowingly, 5 days had passed. Seeing that the sun was about to set, the Almighty still did not show any signs of movement. She absent-mindedly fished for another 2 hours, but still did not find anything. She sighed. Forget it. His mind was restless today, and he was afraid that he would not be able to catch any fish. It would be the same even if he tried again tomorrow. Just as she was about to put away the fishing rod, the hook suddenly sank. A big fish had taken the bait. Ning Xuemo was overjoyed and hurriedly reeled in the fishing line. Ning Xuemo did not know the size of the fish that had bitten the hook. She only felt that the hook was very heavy. Even the fishing rod was bent like a bow. Looking at the weight, it was probably a few dozen catties. It was enough for the father and son to eat. Ning Xuemo neatly retracted the hook. A moment later, she fished something out of the water. When Ning Xuemo saw the appearance of the thing, her hands trembled and she almost shook it into the water again. It was a shiny white stone with runes flashing on it. Heavenly Tao Stone. Ning Xuemo had not seen it since it ran away from her and Shinjuli's wedding. She did not expect that she would be able to fish it out of the lake. The Heavenly Tao Stone turned slightly on her hook and flew straight up. It landed neatly in front of Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo looked at it and guessed, "Did you accidentally fall into the water?" The Heavenly Tao Stone was speechless. "I'm the Heavenly Tao Stone. How could I accidentally fall into the water? I automatically entered the water to hide from you. Don't make wild guesses." The Heavenly Tao Stone angrily replied. Ning Xuemo smiled. She had been a little bored these days and had not bickered with the stone for a long time. Now that she saw it, she felt a little familiar with it and chatted with it for a while. This time, the Heavenly Tao Stone's words were unfathomable. Every word seemed to carry a Zen meaning. What did it mean by defying nature and changing one's fate? What did it mean by going against nature? Ning Xuemo was confused. Chapter 23:41. She faintly felt that something was amiss. Just as she was about to ask for more details, the Heavenly Law Stone spiraled up and a line of words appeared in Ning Xuemo's mind. "If you are in a difficult situation, you can come and find me." After saying that, it disappeared. Ning Xuemo was speechless. The Heavenly Path Stone would not speak without reason. Ning Xuemo could not hold it in any longer. She threw the fishing rod and flew directly to the quiet room where Shinjuli was. There was still no movement in the quiet room. Even the wizardry barrier outside the quiet room was still there. Although the wizardry barrier was very powerful, it was not difficult for Ning Xuemo, who was used to breaking wizardry barriers. When she broke the wizardry barrier, the Almighty in the quiet room would feel it. However, the feeling was not strong, so it should not have a big impact on him. Ning Xuemo tried to knock on the wizardry barrier to give some movement inside. After waiting for a while, she started to break the barrier. After a while, the wizardry barrier disappeared. She pushed the door open and walked in slowly. Then, she stood there in a daze. In the quiet room, Shinjuli was meditating on the cattail hassock. She could not see his figure. However, there was a huge white jade lotus bud. The flower bud was layered and shone with a 7-colored luster. Ning Xuemo stood there in a daze for a while. Then, she slowly walked forward and touched the flower bud with her fingers. She called out softly, "Almighty." The flower bud trembled slightly. It did not bloom. Instead, the petals moved closer to the center. This scene was incomparably strange. Ning Xuemo sighed. Her fingers didn't leave the flower bud as she once again spoke in a low voice, "Great God, you and I are husband and wife. No matter what you become, I can accept it. What is there that you can't let go of? If there is a problem, we can solve it together, okay?" Although her voice was low, it was very clear. Naturally, it was transmitted to the flower bud. After a while, a young voice came from the flower bud. "Xuemo, send me to the misty lake." Although the voice was young, there was a kind of hoarseness in it. Ning Xuemo's heart ached. Needless to say, the Almighty had turned into a baby again. Lotuses needed to be nourished by water, yet they were growing on this praying mat. No wonder the petals looked so weak. "Okay." Ning Xuemo picked it up from the futon. "Don't let anyone see." The tender voice warned again. "I understand, don't worry." Ning Xuemo simply put it into the storage space, then left the quiet room and went straight to the misty lake. The misty lake was vast and incomparably vast. One couldn't see the end of it with a single glance. The lake was rich in spiritual qi, and even the fish in the lake were more intelligent than the fish outside. Qiong Qi and Ting Qi were bathing in the lake in their original forms. They were swimming around in the lake, looking very comfortable. Suddenly, they saw Ning Xuemo flying over and standing by the lakeside. The two mythological beasts thought that she wanted to fish again, so they immediately jumped into the water and drove the fish from the bottom of the lake to her side. This was what they often did. Ning Xuemo was fishing, and they were playing in the water. They didn't interfere with each other. Unexpectedly, Ning Xuemo didn't come to fish this time. Instead, she directly jumped into the lake. The two mythological beasts were shocked. They didn't dare to bathe with her. If the Divine Lord knew, he would directly turn them into stone statues. The two mythological beasts hurriedly swam to the shore. Then, they looked at Ning Xuemo, who was in the water, in surprise. "Devil Lord," Ning Xuemo smiled at them and said leisurely, "I want to take a good bath. Do you want to take a look?" As she spoke, she slowly took off her coat. Chapter 23:42. The two mythical beasts were so scared that they almost fell back into the water. "Devil Master, please bathe, please bathe. We will clear the area for you." The two mythical beasts ran away like lightning. Not only did they run away, but they also warned other mythical beasts that wanted to bathe in the lake not to disturb them. The two mythical beasts were afraid that their divine madam's body would be seen by others, so they automatically took up the task of guarding the lake and chased away all creatures that might come close to the misty lake. "Almighty God, I have cleared the area for you. You can come out and recover." Ning Xuemo took out the huge flower bud from the storage space and placed it on the water surface. An hour later, the originally withered and somewhat dim flower bud finally became sparkling and translucent, as if it had absorbed enough water. The petals opened up slightly. Ning Xuemo had been guarding it by its side. Seeing that, she was slightly relieved. She touched the flower bud with her finger and asked, "Almighty God, are you feeling better?" "I'm feeling better." A young voice came from the flower bud. Even the voice was not as hoarse as before. It was much clearer. "Almighty God, what is going on? Can you tell me now?" Ning Xuemo was full of curiosity. When she carried the Almighty God into the quiet room, he was just a little weak and did not look like he was going to turn into a flower bud. Why did he go back after cultivating for 6 days? There was no response from the flower bud for a while. After a while, the young voice finally said, "I don't know. Originally, I could recover after cultivating for 3 days. But on the 3rd day, my body became weak and I became like this." Could it be that he went crazy after cultivating for 3 days? Or did he use too much of his divine power to revive Shuailan and became exhausted? Ning Xuemo felt a little guilty. If she did not let the Almighty revive Shuailan, perhaps this would not have happened to him. She looked at the flower bud and could not help but sigh. Almighty God, why didn't you call me when something like this happened? Also, you should be able to recover faster in the water. Why are you cooped up in the quiet room and not coming out? If he came out earlier and soaked in the misty lake, the Almighty would be able to recover faster. I thought I would be able to recover after cultivating for a few more days. I didn't want you to worry about me. The voice in the bud sounded a little muffled. As for why he didn't come out earlier to soak in the misty lake, it was because he knew that the 8 mythological beasts were bathing in the lake almost every day. If he were to come out as a lotus flower, he might be eaten by the 8 mythological beasts. Of course, he could open his mouth inside the flower bud, but that would expose his real body. Moreover, he really didn't want to expose his childish appearance in front of the 8 divine beasts. Therefore, he had been enduring in the quiet room and cultivating. The more he cultivated, the more shriveled the flower bud became, until the moment Ning Xuemo barged in. Ning Xuemo was a little angry. Guru, we agreed that we'd share blessings and hardships together. You can't not tell me when you're in trouble. Whenever she was in trouble, the first person she thought of was the Almighty God. He had also saved her countless times and helped her solve countless problems. Now that he was in trouble, how could he not tell her? How could he bear it alone? Husband and wife were of the same mind. Did he really see her as a wife that he could rely on? If he could shelter her from the wind and rain, she could also shelter him from the wind and rain. The flower bud flickered with a faint light. Yes, Xuemo. I was wrong. Chapter 23:43. The great god actually apologized to her. Ning Xuemo's heart softened, and all her anger disappeared. She looked at the flower bud, and a ball of curiosity rose in her heart. What did the great god look like now? Did he still look like the ginseng child when they met at Heavenly Book Mountain? She was actually quite cute when he looked like that. Great God, can you let me see you? Ning Xuemo saw that the flower bud was becoming more and more translucent, and knew that he was showing signs of improvement. Her curiosity was piqued. There was no movement from the flower bud. Ning Xuemo looked at it for a while, and finally gave up. Forget it if you don't want to. The great god was used to being high and mighty, and he was used to being dignified and domineering. It was indeed a challenge for him to show his adorable baby face in front of others. But she really wanted to see him again. The little Nine Zun from back then, the little Nine Zun that she had treated as a ginseng child and had gone through some trials with her. She really wanted to see him again, but since the great god was not willing, she did not want to force him. Just as she finished speaking, the flower bud actually opened slightly, and then, a hand stretched out from inside. It was a small hand with 4 little dimples on the back of it. The hand was indeed small, about the size of a 4 to 5 month old child, and it looked like it was carved out of white jade. Ning Xuemo stared blankly. The hand was so small, like a lotus root melon, making her want to pick it up and take a bite. Disaster. The great god was really a disaster. He had become small, and even his hand could grow so alluring. What was he if not a disaster? Ning Xuemo could not help but reach out and poke the small hand with a finger. The small hand immediately held her finger. That scene was exceptionally comical and harmonious. Even Ning Xuemo herself was about to be melted by this scene. She really wanted to grab the hand and pull the child out, and then hug him in her arms and give him a few kisses. Ning Xuemo only felt a surge of motherly love in her heart. Xuemo. A young voice came from the flower bud. Ning Shuama subconsciously softened her voice. If you see my original body, you will have to pay a real price. Do you want to see the whole thing? The voice of the boy in the bud was as tender as the sound of nature, but the words he said made Ning Shuama shiver uncontrollably. She thought of the price she had paid in those days. She was kneaded into all kinds of shapes by him as if he was kneading dough. His endurance, his transformation, what's the real price? Ning Shuama asked fearlessly. Shuama, I've been married to you for a few months, but I haven't really enjoyed myself to the fullest. It was obviously a child's voice, but the words he spoke carried a hint of the evilness of an adult. I'll let you see it all once, and you'll let me really enjoy myself once in the future. How about that? Ning Shuama, she laughed dryly and decisively withdrew her hand. She said firmly, Great God, I think I should give you some face. I won't look at your original body. Come, you can continue to cultivate. I'll be your guard. The small hand in the bud had no intention of withdrawing. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'm absolutely certain. Ning Shuama patted the little hand. Be good. Go and properly cultivate. He had not enjoyed himself to the fullest, but her back was already aching. If he enjoyed himself to the fullest, she would probably be unable to get out of bed for a few days. There was a chuckle from the flower bud, and it finally stopped talking. Because the area had already been cleared and Ning Shuama was standing guard at the side, the lotus bud was able to focus on cultivating in the water without any misgivings. Chapter 23:44. 2 hours had passed. 4 hours had passed. Half a day had passed. A day had passed. Then, another night had passed. Ning Shuama had been guarding him in the water and did not step on the shore. Shinjiuli tried to persuade her to go back to the room to rest, but Ning Shuama shook her head and refused. She wanted to protect him until he recovered. Of course, she did not stay idle in the water. The big lotus that Shinjiuli was in was full of spiritual power. It attracted the fishes and prawns in the lake who wanted to suck the spiritual power from the lotus. However, Ning Shuama managed to drive them away in time. In fact, Shinjiuli could also set up a wizardry barrier, but if he did so, his recovery speed would be a few times slower. Now that he had Ning Shuama by his side, he only needed to focus on his practice. While Ning Shuama was guarding him, she also paid attention to her son's condition. The little thing did not break out of the barrier, but his life was not in danger. She guessed that he was still fighting inside. Little Nyenma had already fought 2 battles in the barrier. He knew that the barrier was set up by his father. Although the beasts looked fierce, they would not really kill him. At most, they would hurt him and make him roll a few times. Therefore, when little Nyenma encountered the beasts in the rainforest, he was not really afraid. He only needed to use his sword skills. He thought that this situation would continue until the day he broke out of the barrier. However, he did not expect to encounter a tough opponent. For example, the black python that suddenly appeared. The black python seemed to be living a good life in the rainforest. Its scales were round and crystal like jade. It was not the biggest, but once it curled up, it was enough to wrap around little Nyenma twice. However, little Nyenma fell hard when he was wrapped around by it. The black python was as fast as lightning. It could even spit out poisonous fog. Little Nyenma was a little slow in fighting with it, so it wrapped around him. The black python wrapped around his body twice and then tightened its grip in the middle. As everyone knew, once a python wrapped around its prey, it would desperately squeeze the prey's heart until it stopped beating or burst. Once little Nyenma was entangled by it, he was immediately suffocated by its enormous strength. His little face turned red. He struggled with all his might, but his hands were also entangled by the black python, so he couldn't break free. The snake was getting tighter and tighter. Little Nyenma felt dizzy, and his heart was about to explode. His vision turned black, and his face gradually turned pale. However, the snake still did not intend to let him go. It was serious. Little Nyenma immediately realized that if he did not think of a way to escape, he would really be entangled by the black python. If the son of a god and a devil were to die in the hands of a black python, that would be too shameful. Once a person's life was threatened, he would be able to unleash his full potential. Little Nyenma was no exception. In his panic, he actually learned the bone shrinking technique without anyone teaching him. His body instantly shrunk to half its original size. Taking advantage of the fact that the black python had yet to react, he tapped the tip of his foot and soared into the sky. Little Nyenma had never suffered such a big loss before. Once he was free, his eyes turned red. At the same time, the black python was enraged when the food that it was about to eat suddenly flew away. It stretched its body and chased after Little Nyenma. Obviously, it did not want to let him go. Although Little Nyenma did not understand why such a ferocious creature appeared in his father's array, he knew that he had to die. Now, he knew that it was time for him to die. He could not afford to have a glimmer of hope. He also risked his life. Chapter 23:45. He was a genius in spells, so he did not pay much attention to physical training. He had only learned a few of the special footwork that his mother had taught him before. Now that he was in a life-or-death situation, the footwork that his mother had taught him was particularly clear in his mind. He immediately performed according to it. At first, he was not very familiar with it, but after a while, he finally became more flexible and faster. Ning Xuema's footwork was originally a set of footwork for escaping. Once she performed it, even the gods could not catch her. Now, Little Nyenma was performing the footwork on the black python. He was swimming around the black python. It looked very dangerous, but the black python could not even touch a corner of his clothes. After a while, Little Nyenma finally figured out the black python's movements. Finally, he changed from defense to offense and began to attack the black python's weak spot. After an hour, the black python's weak spot had been stabbed several times. Blood was flowing out, and its movement was getting slower and slower. Finally, he cut off the python's head, and it died on the ground. Little Nyenma was so tired that he panted. He sat on the ground and stared at the black python's body in a daze. Once he killed the ferocious beasts in the jungle, they would disappear instantly. Only the harmless animals were real. Now, such a fierce and poisonous black python was also real. This time, he was afraid that he would have become the black python's food if he was a little slower. More importantly, the black python was highly poisonous. If he did not have the antidote with him, he would be dead this time. Such a dangerous thing could not be released by his father, could it? Who could it be? Little Nyenma finally remembered the mysterious man with the ghost face. He clenched his little fists. Needless to say, this black python should be released by that guy. That guy must not be dead. Now, he was hiding in a corner and watching him fight for his life. Was that guy Luo Jochin? He could not defeat the Divine Lord and the Great Devil, so he secretly came in to plot against him. That guy knew how to possess a body. Could it be that he wanted to kill him and then possess him to plot against his parents? The more Little Nyenma thought about it, the more likely it was. His whole body was alert. He must not let this person's conspiracy succeed. He had to escape from here and report this matter to his parents. He kicked the black python that couldn't be any more dead, then rubbed his rumbling belly. He steeled his heart and killed the snake. The snake's skin was pitch black, but its flesh was milky white. It was as translucent as the finest cheese. Little Nienma cut off the most delicious part of the python and started a fire to roast it. This time, no one fought with him for food. The snake meat was fresh and delicious, and it was unprecedentedly delicious. He happily ate until he was full. After eating, he only felt that his body's strength had doubled, and his fighting spirit was high. Then, he strode away. Not long after he left, the mysterious man with the ghost face appeared. He bent down to check the pile of snake meat and skin. He shook his head slightly and looked at the direction where little Nienma left. The little guy was smart enough, and his ability to react on the spot was also very strong. However, it was still not enough. He closed his eyes and waved his hand in the air. A moment later, there was a buzzing sound in the air, and a large black thing rushed into the rainforest. It had a human face, cat ears, and a black bat body. When it spread its wings, it was as big as a basketball. This was the second wave of monsters that little Nienma encountered. Chapter 2346. The monster looked ferocious, and the fangs in its mouth were like 2 rows of sawtooth. Little Nienma saw with his own eyes that the strange bat bit a big bluestone and directly chewed the big bluestone into powder. He had no doubt that if he was bitten by this thing, it would definitely tear off a piece of flesh. What was worse was that this monster was not just one, but a group of this kind of monster. Little Nienma was surrounded by a dense swarm of hornets, and he felt as if he had poked a bat's nest. Looking at the dense green eyes around him, little Nienma had goosebumps all over his arms. He had slight trypophobia. With so many bats surrounding him, not to mention attacking him, he felt his scalp go numb. Little Nienma looked at the group of strange bats, and for a moment, he could not figure out whether they were real or simulated by the array formation. He could not run away, so he could only fight. The sword in his hand was swinging like a wheel, and he looked for a place where there were fewer bats and rushed over. The sword in his hand was a magical weapon. Even if the ferocious beast had copper skin and iron bones, it would still be cut by his sword. However, when his sword cut the body of the bats, it was as if he was cutting the body of the bats in the water. The body of the bats was so flexible that even if he cut it, there was no wound. There were too many bats, and they attacked from all directions. There was a slight flaw in little Nienma's sword, and a bat took advantage of it and bit on the clothes on his chest. The clothes melted quickly as if it was corroded by sulfuric acid. Little Nienma was shocked and did not have time to think. He swung his hand and threw away the clothes on his body. In this way, he only had a dudu and a pair of underwear on his body, revealing his white little arms. He looked like a boy in a painting. During the fight, little Nienma's arm was bitten by a bat. Although he was able to slap the bat away in time, a little bit of flesh was still torn, and green blood flowed out. The wound was even more painful, and it made little Nienma cry out in a low voice. He almost wanted to stomp his feet. If his parents or someone to protect him were around, little Nienma was afraid that he would scream. But now, no matter how serious the injury was, he could only rely on himself. He didn't even have the time to shout. He swallowed an antidote pill and continued to fight. He was already in the middle of the formation and surrounded by the rainforest. No matter where he ran, he would not be able to escape the pursuit of these bats. And in this damned array, he couldn't use his telekinesis. Obviously, these bats were not prepared by his father, but by the mysterious ghost-faced person. Shin Nienma hated the mysterious person to the core. He had been fighting with the bats for a while, but none of them were missing. Instead, he was panting from exhaustion. This won't do. If this went on, once his strength was exhausted, he would become a delicious meal for these bats. During the fight, Shin Nyenma realized that these bats were not afraid of the sword, but they seemed to be afraid of fire. Once a bat got close to the kindling wood, it would immediately fly away. If only he could use his telekinesis, he could use fire attacks. In such a fight, he could hardly see any hope. There were too many bats, and soon, there were new wounds on his body. There were a few more bloody wounds on both of his arms, and even his underwear was torn into a beggar's pants. It was almost exposed. Chapter 23:47. Fortunately, the bats that tore off his underwear were using their wings. Otherwise, little Nyenma would have had to take off his underwear to prevent his skin from being corroded. On the trunk of a large tree, the black-clothed, devil-faced man was sitting there, watching the great battle below. This should be considered as pushing him to the extreme, right? If he was really that person, he should have awakened long ago instead of using such a stupid method to fight. He raised his hand and knocked on the jade on his waist. Actually, you have mistaken him for someone else. How could that person be such a child? He sighed softly and looked at the child who was fighting desperately. Forget it, he did not want to play with him anymore. If he really played with the child's life, the couple would definitely come after him. He raised his hand and was about to do something when he suddenly saw a ray of golden light burst out from little Nyenma's body. Although the golden light was very weak, it was still seen by the mysterious man. He was suddenly stunned and withdrew his hand. He looked at the child who was fighting desperately with a complicated expression. The golden light on little Nyenma's body also frightened the strange bats. A few of them even screamed and fell to the ground. They twitched a few times and died. Little Nyenma felt that there was an inexplicable force in his body when he was fighting desperately. That was why the golden light flashed. When he saw that the golden light was effective, he immediately tried to sense the inexplicable force again. However, he did not expect that the inexplicable force would disappear as well. When he wanted to use it, he could not find it. He occasionally glanced at it during the fight and suddenly saw the man in black sitting on the treetop not far away. He immediately clenched his fists. Sure enough, it was this person who was playing tricks. Seeing that the man curled his fingers and seemed to be about to do something, little Nyenma turned his body and suddenly broke through the circle of bats. Like a bullet fired from a gun, he collided with the mysterious man with the ghost face. He used all his strength in this collision, and his speed was very fast. Almost in the blink of an eye, he was in front of the man with the ghost face. Although the man with the ghost face was not prepared, after all, he was very skilled in kung fu. He slightly moved his body and dodged. However, he also realized that there was a big tree behind him. As he dodged, little Nyenma's head flew toward the big tree and collided with it. If little Nyenma was hit, he would be half dead even if his soul was not destroyed. With a wave of her hand, the ghostly face wrapped around little Nyenma's waist and dragged him back. Unexpectedly, the child seemed to be waiting for him to make this move, and actually borrowed the force to crash into his arms. This time, he could no longer dodge and was hit in the chest by the little fellow's fire arrow mallet. This time, it was as if he had been hit by a hammer. His chest felt heavy and he almost fell from the treetop. With a flick of his hand, he pulled little Nyenma's leg and threw him out. Little Nyenma reacted quickly. He spun in the air and stabilized his body. He landed on the top of a tree and stared at the mysterious person with a grimace. He blurted out, "You are a woman." When he bumped into her chest just now, he felt something soft under his scalp, as if he had bumped into a soft mountain. The mysterious person with a grimace was speechless. She looked at the little guy coldly and finally said, "You are naked." Little Nyenma was speechless. He subconsciously looked down and saw that his pants were completely gone. Chapter 23:48. Little Nyenma was speechless. He subconsciously looked down and realized that his pants were gone. He was only left with a rolled-up dudu on his body. His body was completely exposed in front of the person. Although little Nyenma was still young, he already knew how to behave. His little face blushed, and he quickly covered his private parts with his hands. When he looked up again, the person was gone. There was only a piece of cloth left on the spot. Little Nyenma quickly took the cloth and shook it to make sure that it was not poisonous. He then wrapped it around his waist. At this time, the bats were also gone. Little Nyenma was relieved. The mysterious person with the ghost face was actually a woman. This was truly beyond his expectations. Since it was a woman, it was not Luo Jiochin. Then, who could it be? Why did she come in and make things difficult for him? And it almost took his life. Little Nyenma could not figure it out, but he was sure of one thing. This woman did not have good intentions toward him. He did not know what she was planning to do, and he did not have a good impression of this woman. A woman dressed as a man and covered her face with such a scary mask. Her real face must be very ugly, so she was psychopathic and came to bully a child like him. Little Nyenma could not help but curse when he recalled the dirty tricks that this woman had used on him. Ugly monster, female pervert, why do you always follow me around? There was only the sound of the wind in the rainforest. There was no other movement. The mysterious person with the ghost face did not show up, so it seemed that she had really left. Little Nyenma was relieved and did not care about this matter anymore. He continued to look for the way. However, when he looked around, his mind was blown. He had just found the way out, but he didn't expect that in such a short time, the surrounding environment would actually change so drastically. It seemed that someone had added something to the original foundation of the array to make the array more complicated. Now, little Nyenma could not find the way out again. He had to start from the beginning. Needless to say, all of this was the credit of the mysterious person with the ghost face. Little Nyenma almost cursed the person's ancestors in his heart. Helplessly, he had to look for a way out again. On a big rock at the entrance of the array, the mysterious person in black stood facing the wind. Her clothes were fluttering in the wind. Her fingers gently touched the mask on her face. After a moment, she gently smiled. Ugly freak. Female pervert. This was the first time in the world that someone dared to scold her like this. She glanced at the array again. Suddenly, she raised her hand and rubbed her temples. She sighed. It's actually him. It seems that this mission is a little tricky. Her figure flashed and flew away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Shinjioli soaked in the lake for a full 5 days before returning to normal. During these 5 days, Ningxuema kept him company. Of course, she also told him some things, such as fishing and fishing for the heavenly Tao stone. Ningxuema had a feeling that Shinjioli's transformation into a boy had something to do with the Zen words spoken by the heavenly stone. She shared her doubts with Shinjioli, but Shinjioli just hugged her and said, "You've worked hard these days. Let's go back and reward you." He casually caught a few fish and left with Ningxuema. After the two of them left, the surface of the lake rippled again, and the head of the heavenly Tao stone emerged. There was a row of question marks on its body. Logically speaking, Shinjioli could not wait to find it and ask for the reason. Why did he not seem to be interested at all? Chapter 23:49. Logically speaking, shouldn't Shinjioli be eager to find out the reason? Why didn't he seem to be interested at all? This was illogical. This person liked to play hard to get. Maybe he was playing hard to get this time. It wouldn't be fooled by him. If he didn't come to find it and say a lot of good things, it wouldn't reveal the secret to him. In less than 3 days, Shinjioli would definitely find its whereabouts. The heavenly law stone bubbled in the water and sank to the bottom of the lake. It found that the spiritual power at the bottom of the lake was the thickest, and it was very comfortable there. More importantly, the lake could block its breath. If Shinjioli wanted to find it, it would take a few days, but the heavenly law stone obviously miscalculated. 3 days had passed, and Shinjioli still didn't have the intention to find it. It didn't know what he was thinking. The heavenly law stone couldn't hold it anymore. It thought that it was hiding too well, so Shinjioli couldn't find it for a while. Then it wouldn't hide anymore. The heavenly law stone was the highest existence, and it wouldn't lower itself to the guardian's level. So, the heavenly law stone jumped out of the misty lake and returned to the lonely peak where it used to live. There, it waited for Shinjioli's arrival. It stood on the lonely peak for 3 days in the cold wind, but Shinjioli still didn't show up. Could it be that he had found this place before, so he didn't come again? It was dark under the light. The more the heavenly law stone thought about it, the more it thought about it. So, it moved in the night and landed directly in front of Shinjioli's bedroom. Now, he couldn't possibly not see it, right? Of course, it didn't want him to laugh at it for sending itself to the door. So, it landed behind a rock on the left side of the door of the bedroom. It squeezed among several rocks, indicating that it was here to enjoy the scenery. It listened carefully. The bedroom was quiet, which meant that the couple hadn't returned yet. These few days, the couple lived very comfortably. They traveled together and stayed together, almost inseparable. Probably because the child was still in the array, the two of them didn't leave the Fantion Palace and stayed at home. But even if they didn't go out, the two of them still lived happily. They played chess, played the zither, fished, and he even taught her how to draw. The love between the two of them simply made the eyes of the 8 mythological beasts blue with envy. It was a pity that the 8 mythological beasts were all male beasts. Otherwise, they would also want to form a pair and live a happy life. The heavenly law stone stood among a pile of rocks. Occasionally, it would hear the gossip of the 8 divine beasts as it passed by. It sneered in its heart. A supreme god and a devil lord had so many responsibilities on their shoulders. How could they live such an ordinary life? They were going to be busy soon. That night, the wizardry barrier in midair finally opened, and little Nianmao fell straight to the ground. When he landed, it was around midnight, and the Fantion Palace was quiet. He thought that his parents were already asleep and heaved a sigh of relief. He was about to run towards his Qingshao hole. Just as he turned around, he was stunned again. His parents were sitting in an octagonal pavilion not far away. There was a luminous pearl in the pavilion that reflected the soft light on the chessboard on the stone table. The black and white chess pieces on the board were fighting fiercely. At this moment, his father was holding a black chess piece in his hand and looking at him with a faint smile. His mother was holding her chin with her hand and waving at him lovingly. Nianmao, congratulations. You have finally passed the test. Come to mother. In the past, little Nianmao couldn't wait to hear this. He was afraid that his mother would only need to beckon with her finger and directly rush over to her to ask for kisses and hugs. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.